She looked like any other tired nurse stirring cream into bad coffee. Scrubs wrinkled, ponytail loose, eyes half closed. Then a stranger in a charcoal coat leaned across her booth and whispered two words. Black Echo. Her spoon stopped mid-turn. 30 seconds later, a man 3 tables over reached inside his jacket, and the forgettable woman with the soft voice broke his wrist against the edge of a salt shaker before anyone screamed. Glass shattered. A child cried. And the nurse calmly wiped blood off her knuckles like she was wiping down a counter. Before we go any further, hit that like button and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay with me all the way to the end, because what this woman has been hiding from the people who mocked her every single day is going to rewrite everything you think you know about the person sitting next to you at lunch. The bell above the door of the Blue Kettle Diner rang the same way it always did at 12:14 p.m. A tired, flat clang that most of the regulars had stopped hearing years ago. Claire Whitaker heard it. She heard every version of it. The heavy clang when the delivery man came through with crates of eggs at 5 in the morning. The softer tap when Maribel, the 80-year-old waitress, slipped out back to smoke. The sharp double ring when a customer yanked the door too hard. Today's ring was normal. One man, average weight, shoes that squeaked from new rubber. He didn't belong in Westbridge, but that wasn't unusual. A lot of people didn't belong in Westbridge and came anyway. Claire sat in the last booth on the left, the one nobody wanted because the vinyl had a rip shaped like the state of Florida. She liked it. From that booth, she could see the front door, the kitchen pass, the hallway to the bathrooms, and the service exit behind the counter. 4 ways in, 4 ways out, and only one of them visible to someone sitting with their back to the window. She never sat with her back to the window. "You want the usual, honey?" Maribel asked, pencil already moving. "Grilled cheese, no pickle." "You say that every day, and every day I forget." "That's because you don't forget. You just want to hear me say it." Maribel laughed, a gravel sound that came from 4 decades of Lucky Strikes. "Girl, you are too quiet to be this smart." Claire gave her the small smile that had become her public face, the one that said, "I'm harmless. Keep walking. Nothing here to look at." It was a good smile. She had practiced it in a mirror at Walter Reed until it stopped looking like a lie. She was 31 years old. She had short brown hair she cut herself every 6 weeks over a bathroom sink. A scar on her left eyebrow she told people came from a childhood bike accident, and a hospital ID badge that read Whitaker, C.R.N., St. Aurelia Medical Center. The badge was real. The bike accident was not. The bell rang again. 4 men in olive drab PT shirts and civilian cargo pants shouldered through the door, already laughing at something one of them had said on the sidewalk. Fort Halverson crew. She'd seen them 6, maybe 7 times now, rangers by the way they walked. 2 sergeants, 1 specialist, 1 kid who couldn't have been more than 20 and still had the pink sunburn of a boy who'd never lived anywhere south of Wisconsin. The loudest one, broad shoulders, buzz cut, a tattoo of a skull wearing a beret on his forearm, clocked her immediately and elbowed his buddy. "Oh, look, it's Florence Nightingale." The other 3 laughed. They weren't trying to be quiet. They weren't trying to be anything except exactly what they were. Young, cocky, 3 beers into a day off, and looking for somebody small to make themselves feel bigger. "You still taking temperatures for a living, sweetheart?" the tattooed one called out. Claire lifted her coffee cup and took a slow sip. "Don't waste your breath, Ramsey," one of the others said. "She doesn't talk. Maybe she's mute. Maybe that's the medical condition." "Nah, she talks. I heard her order a sandwich once. Sounded like a librarian apologizing for a late book." More laughter. The kid with the sunburn didn't laugh. He just stared at his menu, ears going a deeper shade of red. Maribel shot Claire a look that said, "You want me to handle this?" Claire gave a fractional shake of her head. "No, let them have it." Loud men running their mouths were, in her experience, the least dangerous people in any room. It was the quiet ones you watched. The quiet ones like the man who had just walked in 30 seconds behind them and was now sliding into table 6 without looking at a menu. Table 6 was against the back wall. It had the worst view of the television. Nobody ever sat at table 6 voluntarily. Unless they needed something a good view couldn't give them, like sight lines to both exits, and a wall behind their shoulder blades. Claire's spoon stopped moving in her coffee. The man at table 6 was maybe 40. Clean-shaven. Gray windbreaker, zipped to the throat on a 72-degree day. His hands stayed above the table. That was the tell. Civilians put their hands wherever. Nervous people put them in their laps. Trained people kept them visible, palms down, fingers relaxed, because trained people knew that hidden hands got you shot. He wasn't shot yet. He was the one doing the looking. Hey, nurse lady. Ramsey was still at it. He'd slid into the booth diagonally across from her and was leaning on the aisle-side table like he'd been invited. I got a question for you. Serious question. You ever been shot at? Once, Claire said without looking up. Parking lot of a CVS, kid with a BB gun. The Rangers lost it. Even Ramsey had to grin. See? That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. You nurses, you're good people, real good people. But you would come apart. First time somebody pops off with something real, you'd be in a ball on the floor crying for your mama. And that's fine. Not everybody's built for it. Probably right, Claire said. No probably about it. I've seen grown men freeze, okay? Grown men. Combat vets. It ain't a bad thing. Just means you stay in your lane and you let people like us do the hard stuff. That's all I'm saying. Ramsey spread his hands, magnanimous. Respect the uniform. Respect the scrubs. Everybody's got a job. The kid with the sunburn finally spoke up. Ramsey, man, let it go. I am letting it go. I'm being nice. Am I not being nice? You're being a dick. I'm being honest. There's a difference. Claire turned a page of the paperback she wasn't reading. Agatha Christie, she thought, was an excellent prop. Nobody ever interrupted a woman reading Agatha Christie because nobody under 40 knew who Agatha Christie was. At table 6, the man in the windbreaker ordered coffee. Just coffee. Maribel set it down and he didn't touch it, didn't thank her, didn't look at her. His eyes swept the room in a pattern Claire recognized because it was her own pattern. Door, counter, kitchen pass, bathrooms, door. Every 14 seconds. Like clockwork. He was waiting for something or someone. The bell rang again. A man walked in alone. Tall. Late 50s. A gray windbreaker identical to the one at table 6, except this one was unzipped halfway. A small thing. A deliberate thing. Under the windbreaker, Claire could see the flat edge of a vest she'd worn 100 times herself in 100 places whose names were still classified. He didn't look at the counter. Didn't look at Maribel. He walked straight toward Claire's booth, and somewhere between the door and her table, his eyes found hers and stayed there. She set the book down. 14 years fell away. Afternoon, ma'am, he said, voice pitched low and pleasant. To the Rangers, to Maribel, to the whole diner, he was just a polite stranger asking for directions. He slid into the booth across from her without being invited, and when he leaned forward, his left hand came up to rest casually on the table, pinky finger tapping twice against the laminate. 2 taps. Confirmed threat. Proceed with caution. Black Echo, he said. Table 6. Claire didn't nod, didn't blink. The air in her lungs went cold and thin, the way it used to at elevation, and something under her ribs that had been sleeping for 3 years woke up and stretched. How long? She asked. 90 seconds, maybe less. We couldn't get a team here in time. Backup? 2 outside, 1 on the roof across the street. But he picks up the radio, he picks up the signal, he picks up anything. He triggers it remote. Has to be clean, has to be you, has to be now. What's he carrying? We think a detonator, palm size. He's the spotter, not the vest. The vest is coming. We need him alive. Alive is hard. Alive is necessary, Whitaker. Her first name in 3 years. It landed like a punch. Ramsey, she said, not looking away from the man across from her. Hey, Tattoo, come here a second. Ramsey blinked. Excuse me? Come here right now, your buddies too. Lady, what is your... Now, specialist. Something in her voice had changed. She didn't raise it. She didn't sharpen it. She just took the public smile and set it down and picked up something she hadn't let anyone hear in a very long time. And Ramsey, who had been through enough command voices to know one when he heard it, got up and walked over. The hell? He said. Behind me, Claire said. All 4 of you, behind this booth. Don't turn your heads. Don't look at the back wall. Move. The sunburned kid was the first to obey, and the other 3 followed because one of them had moved and nobody wanted to be the idiot left standing. Ramsey was the last. He dropped into the booth behind her with his mouth half open on a joke that didn't come. Maribel, Claire called, still casual, still Florence Nightingale. Hun, can you do me a favor? Take the tray to the kitchen. Stay back there until I call you. Go through the dry goods pantry, the one with the heavy door. Maribel looked up, saw Claire's face, and didn't ask a single question. That was the thing about a woman who'd worked 40 years in a diner off a military town. She'd seen faces. She knew which ones meant run and which ones meant hide. She picked up her coffee pot and walked, calm as Sunday, straight into the kitchen. What the hell is happening? Ramsay whispered. Hey, nurse, what is happening? Shut up, Claire said pleasantly. The man across from her slid an envelope onto the table, a prop. It would look, to anyone else in the room, like they were concluding some kind of polite personal business. He said, voice barely moving his lips. He's reaching. Claire didn't turn her head. She had a 3-inch wedge of polished napkin holder at the edge of the table, and in its curved chrome she could see a warped, floating miniature of the entire back wall. The man at table 6 had brought his right hand down into his jacket. Ramsay, she said, when I stand up, you and your friends get on the floor. You put your hands over your heads. You do not get up for any reason until somebody in a uniform you recognize tells you to. Do you understand me? Do you understand me, specialist? Yes, ma'am. She stood up. She did not hurry. Hurrying telegraphed. She walked toward table 6 at the unremarkable pace of a woman going to the bathroom, and she got exactly 2 strides away before the man at the table registered that the nurse was not walking past him. She was walking to him, and his eyes widened, and his hand came up out of the jacket fast, too fast, already half clenched around something small and dark and plastic. What happened next took 5 seconds, maybe 6. Later, Ramsay would try to describe it to a chaplain and find out that his memory had broken it into still photographs with nothing between them. Still one. The nurse's left hand sweeping the napkin dispenser off the table as she passed. Full metal, heavy enough to split a brick. It left her hand like a thrown baseball. Still 2. It hit the man's face, above the cheekbone, and his head snapped sideways exactly far enough to take his eyes off his own right hand. Still 3. She was on him. Her right hand clamped over his right wrist, thumb pressing up into the tendons between the small bones, the exact place on the human body where grip strength lives, and where, if you know what you're doing, you can make it die in a quarter of a second. The black plastic thing fell out of his fingers onto the table. Still 4. Her left hand came up under his jaw from the side. Not a punch, a precise open palm strike to the hinge of the mandible, and the back of his skull hit the wall behind him with a sound like a dropped melon. Still 5. She rolled him out of the booth and onto the tile, face down, his own right arm locked up behind his shoulder blades in a hold that would pop the joint at the first twitch. Her knee was on his spine. Her free hand was already scooping the black plastic thing away across the floor, out of his reach, toward the feet of the man in the gray windbreaker, who had risen from her booth and was moving toward the kitchen to cover the back exit. Clear, she said, not loud. Clear, he said back. She leaned down over the man pinned beneath her, and for the first time her voice was not quiet and not pleasant. Who's the courier? She said. Where's he bringing it? What time? He spat at her. There was blood in it. She pressed her knee down another quarter of an inch, just enough for him to feel it, and he went from spitting to gasping. I'm a nurse, she told him, very calmly. I know exactly how much I can do to you without leaving a mark. If you don't start talking in about 30 seconds, I'm going to show you. Whitaker, the man by the kitchen said. Stand down. Team's on the block. She didn't move her knee, but she didn't press harder either. Outside tires. Not the squeal of civilian brakes, the controlled, heavy stop of government SUVs hitting a curb at the exact speed their drivers had been trained to use. Doors opening, boots on the sidewalk. The bell over the door rang for the 4th time in 12 minutes, and this time the people coming through it had plate carriers and carbines, and the kind of quiet that only comes from professional men who have already decided what they will do if anyone in the room does the wrong thing. Ma'am, the first one said, we've got him. Please step back. Claire stepped back. She didn't hand off the wrist, she gave it, a specific one-hand motion that any Tier 1 operator would recognize, showing the other man's relaxed tendons and the absence of weapons on his person. The ranger took the wrist without a word, and the transfer was so smooth that if you blinked you might have missed it had happened at all. You got the device? She asked. Under the counter, bomb squad's 2 minutes out. He's the spotter. There's a vest somewhere, probably already en route. We know. We're rolling the interdiction now. She stepped back farther. She rolled her shoulders, one at a time. There was a small smear of the spotter's blood across her left knuckles. She looked at it for a second like she was surprised to see it there, and then she picked a paper napkin off the nearest table and wiped it off with the same absent motion a waitress uses to wipe down a counter at the end of a shift. The diner, which had been frozen in a held breath, started to come unfrozen. Someone was crying. Someone was laughing, the high hysterical laugh of a person who had just understood they were alive. A little boy at the counter, Claire hadn't seen him before, and she hated that she hadn't, was staring at her with his mouth open and his chocolate milk forgotten. She crouched down to his level. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" He nodded, tiny and terrified. "Can you do me a favor? Can you close your eyes for about 20 seconds? I'm going to count. You don't have to see the next part, all right?" He closed his eyes. She counted to 20 in a soft, even voice, while behind her 2 rangers zip-tied a semi-conscious man and walked him out past the shattered glass of a napkin dispenser and the wide, stunned faces of 4 soldiers who, 10 minutes earlier, had been explaining to a nurse how she would come apart the first time somebody pulled a gun. When she got to 20, the man was gone. The boy opened his eyes. "Good job," she said. "Are you a superhero?" he whispered. She laughed, and it was the first thing she'd done in 10 minutes that didn't look rehearsed. "No, honey, I'm just a nurse." She stood up. The man in the gray windbreaker was waiting for her by the door. She knew his face better than she knew her own mother's. Once upon a time, in a place she was not allowed to name, he had pulled her out of a collapsed stairwell with 2 cracked ribs and half a dead teammate still in her arms. He had not aged well. Neither, she supposed, had she. "We need to go," he said. "Questioning, fingerprints, the whole 9. You know the drill." "I know the drill. The base commander wants to see you personally. Tell him I'm on my lunch break." He almost smiled. "Claire. Sawyer. Come on, please." She looked back over her shoulder. Ramsey was still in the booth. His 3 buddies were still in the booth. None of them had moved. None of them had gotten on the floor, and none of them had gotten up. They were just sitting there, 4 grown men in a row, staring at her like children who had just learned something about the world that could not be unlearned. Ramsey, the loud one, the specialist with the skull tattoo. His mouth was open. He wasn't saying anything. His eyes were very wet, and Claire understood without being told that he had realized in the last 5 minutes that if she had taken his advice, if she had done what a nurse was supposed to do, if she had stayed in her lane and curled up on the floor and cried for her mother, every single person in this diner would be in 70 pieces scattered across the parking lot. She held his gaze for a beat. 2 beats. She did not smile. She did not frown. She did not say anything at all, because she had learned a long time ago that silence from a woman like her landed harder than any word she could have chosen. Then she turned and walked out into the afternoon sun behind Sawyer, and the bell over the door rang a 5th time. The back of the SUV smelled like new leather and old gun oil. Sawyer didn't talk for the first mile. Neither did she. A cruiser ran escort up ahead. No lights, moving through West Bridge's Friday traffic like it had priority nobody else could see. "You should have called in," Sawyer said finally. "I didn't have a number to call." "You had a number. You chose not to have a number." Same outcome. Not the same, Claire. Not by a long shot. She watched a kid on a bike fly past on the sidewalk. Red helmet, pink streamers on the handlebars. A dog in a saddlebag, tongue out, ears back in the wind. The kind of detail that, in another life, she would have noted, logged, and discarded. In this life, she just watched it go. "How'd you find me?" she asked. "You filed a nursing license with the state of Ohio under your real name 2 years ago." "I wasn't hiding from you." "You were hiding from somebody." "Yeah." "Who?" "Myself, mostly." He didn't push it. Sawyer had always known when to stop asking. That was one of the reasons he'd been her team lead. And that was one of the reasons he was the one they'd sent to find her now. And that the SUV turned off the boulevard and down the access road toward the east gate of Fort Halverson. The guard at the gate looked at Sawyer's credentials, looked at Claire's face, looked at Sawyer again, and didn't say a word as he waved them through. Somewhere above them, a helicopter was circling. The sound of it was a sound she used to hear in her sleep. "They're going to run your prints," Sawyer said. "You know that." I know. I can't stop it. I couldn't stop it if I wanted to. The system's going to say what the system's going to say, and a lot of people who've been very sure of a lot of things for 3 years are going to have a very bad afternoon. Good. He looked at her. Is it? She didn't answer. She was watching the low concrete building at the end of the access road, the one with the black glass windows and the unmarked door. The one where, 6 hours ago, she had been a woman no one was looking for, and where in 15 minutes she was going to become a ghost walking back through her own funeral. The SUV stopped. Sawyer killed the engine but didn't get out. Last chance, he said quietly. You want me to turn around. You want me to drive you to a bus station and forget I ever saw you. You say the word. She thought about it. She thought about the spotter's blood on a paper napkin. She thought about the little boy at the counter with his eyes squeezed shut, counting in his head. She thought about Ramsey, staring at her like she was the first real thing he had ever seen. And she thought about the vest that was still out there, somewhere, moving toward a target she didn't yet know. She thought about her team. Drive on, she said. Sawyer nodded once. They got out of the SUV. The unmarked door opened from the inside. A woman in ACUS was standing there with a clipboard and a face that had not been told who was coming. Name? The woman said, pen ready. Claire held out her hand, palm up, finger steady, the same hand that had broken a wrist against the edge of a salt shaker 22 minutes earlier. Run the prints, she said. The name's going to come up on its own. The woman hesitated for a half second, then pressed Claire's thumb to the glass scanner mounted beside the door. The scanner flashed green, then amber, then red, then a color Claire had never seen a fingerprint scanner produce before, a flat, unblinking white that took over the entire panel. From somewhere inside the building, a klaxon started. Not an alarm klaxon, a different one. The specific, rarely used tone that meant a classified identity has just been triggered in an unclassified database, and every terminal in this building is about to lock out until a 2-star general personally authorizes an override. The woman with the clipboard looked up from her screen. Her face had gone the color of skim milk. Ma'am, she said slowly, the system is telling me you've been dead since October of 2023. Claire pulled her hand back from the scanner and wiped her thumb absently on the hem of her scrubs. Yeah, she said, I heard. Down the hall, somewhere behind 3 sets of locked doors, a phone started ringing, then a second phone, then a third. By the time the fourth one began, every door in the corridor was opening at once, and the sound of running boots filled the building like water flooding a hull. Sawyer put a hand lightly on Claire's shoulder. Welcome back, Nightingale, he murmured. She didn't answer. She was looking down the corridor at the far end where a heavy steel door marked Classified Archives had just unsealed itself with a pneumatic hiss, and where, framed in the pale light spilling from inside, a woman with 3 stars on her collar was walking toward her with a folder in one hand and an expression on her face that Claire hadn't seen on a living human being in 3 years. The folder was open, and on the top page, upside down from where Claire stood but legible anyway, was a single black and white photograph of a younger version of herself, bleeding from a head wound, dragging a man twice her size across a scorched stretch of dirt, somewhere the United States government had never officially been. Stamped across the photo, in red ink that had faded, but not enough, killed in action. The 3 stars stopped 6 feet away. Lieutenant Whitaker, she said, voice tight and strange. I'd like you to explain to me, very slowly, exactly how the hell you've been buying groceries in Ohio for the past 36 months. Claire looked at her. Outside, the klaxon was still going. Somewhere beyond the wall, the helicopter made another slow pass. And in a diner 3 miles away, a little boy with a chocolate milk was telling his mother, for the 4th time and not the last, about the nurse who had asked him to close his eyes. Ma'am, Claire said, I think you're going to want to sit down first. The 3-star did not sit down. She stood exactly where she was, folder open against her forearm, eyes locked on Claire's face, in the way people look at a photograph of a dead relative they have been carrying in a wallet for years, checking to see if the picture still matches the face they remember. Around her, the corridor was full of movement, men in uniform jogging past with phones to their ears, a warrant officer shouting something about terminal resets, 2 MPS posting themselves at the ends of the hallway like this was a room that suddenly required guards. The general didn't seem to hear any of it. She didn't seem to see it either. Whitaker, she said. General Lassiter. You know my name. I know a lot of names, ma'am. I've had 3 years to remember them. The general's jaw moved once, a small involuntary tightening, and Claire realized the woman in front of her was about 10 seconds from either a perfectly controlled tactical debrief or a complete unprofessional breakdown, and that Lassiter herself didn't know yet which one it was going to be. Conference room 4, Lassiter said at last. Now, Sawyer, you're with us. Everyone else, get out of the hallway. This is not a parade. The corridor cleared in under 5 seconds. Doors shut. Claire and Sawyer followed the general down past the archive room and through a set of heavy double doors that whispered closed behind them with the soft hydraulic sigh of a room that had been designed so that nothing said inside it would ever leave. Conference room 4 had a long table, 12 chairs, a wall of screens that were currently black, and the smell of burned coffee that had been sitting on a warmer since early that morning. Lassiter set the folder on the table. She did not open it further. She looked at Claire the way a commander looks at a soldier who has just done something very impressive and very stupid at the same time, and she put both of her palms flat on the laminate and said, I buried you. I know. I personally handed a folded flag to a woman in Tucson who thought she was your aunt. My Aunt Dee. Your Aunt Dee? Yes. She cried for about 20 minutes, and then she asked me if I could stay for supper because she had made too much pot roast, and I sat in her kitchen and ate pot roast with a woman who was burying her niece. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes, ma'am. I don't think you do. The general's voice stayed even, but something underneath it had gone sharp. There's a headstone with your name on it in section 60. There's a widow in Fort Campbell who has spent 3 years telling her son that his father died with a hero covering him. I have stood at a podium in front of 400 people and used the words selfless sacrifice. I have lied, Whitaker, to everybody who ever loved you, on the strength of a file that said you were a body we couldn't bring home. I know. Do you have anything to say about that? Claire looked down at the table, then up. I'd do it again, she said quietly. Ma'am? Lassiter exhaled through her teeth. Sit, she said. Claire sat. Sawyer sat across from her, back straight, hands folded. He wasn't going to say a word unless someone asked him a direct question. He understood, the way old soldiers understand, that this was not his room. Start from the night, Lassiter said. Start from the compound. You left the ridge with Marston on your back. Tell me what happened after that. I've read the report. I've read it 40 times. I want to hear it from your mouth. Claire's hands were very still in her lap. Marston didn't make it to the extraction point. I know. He died about a quarter mile from the LZ. I kept walking for another 10 minutes before I let myself check. I didn't want to be right. And then? Then I put him down behind a rock so the sun wouldn't get to him right away, and I took his tags, and I kept going. The Black Hawk was already gone. The secondary LZ was compromised. I had the ridge, the radio, and about 2 hours of water. Command's last transmission was hold in place. We'll come for you at first light. You didn't hold in place. No, ma'am? Why not? Claire looked at her hands. Because at about 2300 I heard the second Black Hawk come in, and I heard it hit something on the way out, and I heard it go down. And I knew that it was the QRF. And I knew that nobody was coming for me at first light or any other light. And I knew that the radio was the only thing on that ridge that could tell anyone where I was. And I knew that the people on the other side of the ridge also had ears. So you destroyed the radio? Yes, ma'am. You went dark on purpose. I went dark because staying lit was going to get the rest of my team killed, and I didn't know yet that the rest of my team was already dead. The general's face didn't move, but a muscle in her cheek did, once, and she looked down at the folder on the table like she was looking at something she had been carrying for a very long time without knowing how heavy it was. Keep going, she said. I walked for 6 days, mostly at night. I ate a dog at one point. I'm not proud of that. I crossed the border under a truck hauling scrap. The driver never knew. I got to the city and I turned myself in to an embassy I had been told, in training, was a last resort. And I asked to speak to the deputy station chief by a code name I had memorized in case of exactly this situation. And I was told by a 19-year-old kid at the desk that the deputy station chief had rotated out 2 months ago and the new one didn't recognize the code. Jesus, Sawyer muttered. Claire went on. I sat in that waiting room for 4 hours. I watched a television over the reception desk. There was an American news anchor, and he was reading names off a list of service members killed in an incident in a country the United States was not operating in, and my name was on the list, and my rank was wrong, and the picture they used was from my basic graduation, and I was looking at myself on a television in a country where I was supposed to be a ghost, and I had a choice to make. What choice? Lassiter said. I could go back to being Lieutenant Whitaker, and I could try to convince a new station chief in a new political climate that I wasn't a defector or a double or a hallucination, and I could spend the next 18 months being debriefed in a room while my Aunt Dee got her flag taken back out of her china cabinet. Or I could walk out of that embassy before anyone ran my face, and I could disappear, and I could let the lie be true. And you walked out. I walked out. What? Because my team was already buried, and I thought... Her voice caught. It was the first time. She cleared her throat and made it behave. I thought if I went back, somebody was going to have to stand in front of 400 people and say they'd been wrong, and somebody else was going to have to ask why the QRF went down, and somebody else was going to have to ask who sold the grid coordinates, and nobody was going to be able to answer because the people who could answer were on that ridge with Marston. And so I figured the kindest thing I could do for my team, for their families, for the mission, for everyone, was to let them keep the story they already had. The room was quiet for a long time. That wasn't your call to make, Lieutenant, Lassiter said at last. No, ma'am, it wasn't. You understand you're going to be investigated. I know. You understand that's going to be unpleasant. I've had unpleasant. You understand your nursing license in Ohio is going to come under immediate review, and St. Aurelia Medical Center is going to have some very difficult questions about how they onboarded a woman whose social security number belongs to a corpse. Claire's hand twitched on the table. The general saw it, didn't comment. The hospital didn't do anything wrong. I used a real license. It just wasn't in this name. I'll bet. A knock at the door. A young lieutenant stuck his head in without waiting to be told. General, they've got the vest. Lassiter's head turned so fast Claire heard a vertebra crack. Say that again? The interdiction, ma'am. 5th and Harlow, parking garage underneath the federal building. Our people intercepted a white panel van. Driver's in custody. The vest is in the van. Bomb squad's on scene. No detonation. Casualties? One of ours took a round in the shoulder. He'll be fine. The driver's alive. Talking already, apparently. Get me everything he says. Every word. Scrub his phone. Scrub the van. I want plate readers pulled on every intersection between the diner and that garage for the last 72 hours. And I want it an hour ago. Yes, ma'am. The door closed. Lassiter turned back to Claire, and for the first time, something like the ghost of a smile touched the corner of her mouth. It wasn't warm. It was the expression of a woman who has just had a piece of very bad math come out exactly right. You stopped it, she said. Sawyer stopped it. I just helped with the lunch rush. Don't do that. Do what, ma'am? Don't minimize. You are not a small woman, Whitaker, and I don't have the patience today to watch you pretend to be one. Claire didn't answer. Here's what's going to happen, Lassiter said. You are going to sit in this building for the next 72 hours. You're going to talk to a lot of people. Some of them are going to be from my side of the aisle. Some of them are going to be from a 3-letter organization that does not technically exist, and they are going to want to know things that I can't protect you from. You are going to answer them truthfully and completely. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am. In exchange, I am not going to let a single one of them within 10 feet of your Aunt Dee, or the little old lady who serves you grilled cheese, or anybody else in your civilian life. Your cover is going to stay as intact as I can make it. For now. Because the last thing I need in the middle of whatever the hell we just walked into is a 3-ring circus about a dead nurse coming back to life. Are we clear on that too? Yes, ma'am. Good. Lassiter straightened. Sawyer, she's yours. Secure room. Get her a change of clothes, get her a meal, let her sleep if she'll sleep. Tomorrow morning, 0800, she's back in this chair, and we start at the top. Yes, ma'am. And Whitaker. Ma'am. Lassiter paused with her hand on the door. Pot roast, she said, without turning around. She wanted you to know it was pot roast. She wanted somebody to eat it with her, and I was the only person in the room. Think about that tonight. Then the door closed, and she was gone. Sawyer sat with his hands folded in front of him for a long moment before he finally let out a breath he had been holding for what looked like the entire meeting. "That went better than I thought it would," he said. "She didn't cry." "No, but she wanted to. I know." "Claire." She looked up. "You can't do this again," Sawyer said very quietly. "Whatever happens in the next 3 days. However this shakes out, you don't get to walk out of an embassy waiting room a second time." "I know." "Do you?" She looked at him. The scar over her eyebrow was white in the fluorescent light. She looked older than 31. She had always looked older than 31. "Yeah," she said. "I do." He didn't believe her. She could see that. But he nodded anyway, the way a man nods when he's decided to trust a thing he knows he shouldn't, and he stood up and opened the door and walked her down a long corridor to a room with a bed and a shower and a locked door and a window that didn't open, and he left her there. The shower ran hot for exactly 4 minutes before someone upstairs remembered they were supposed to ration the water in buildings like this. Claire stood under it anyway and washed a dead man's blood out from under her fingernails and watched the pink swirl down the drain and waited to feel something about it. She didn't. She dried off with a towel stamped U.S. Army that had been washed so many times it felt like paper. She put on the gray sweats someone had left folded on the bed. She sat on the edge of the mattress and listened to her own breathing for a while. Somewhere in the building, phones were still ringing. Somewhere in the world, a little boy was telling his mother about a nurse for the 5th time, and a specialist named Ramsey was sitting in an interview room of his own and trying to explain to a JAG officer why he and 3 other rangers had been sitting behind a booth with their hands on their heads while a civilian woman neutralized a hostile combatant in a diner. She hoped in a distant and uncharitable way that Ramsey was having a worse day than she was. The phone on the nightstand rang. It was a red phone, the kind nobody ever sees anymore, and it didn't have a keypad. She picked it up. "Whitaker." "You're not supposed to be alive," said a man's voice. Soft, almost friendly. She went still. "Who is this?" "Somebody who has been looking for you for a very long time, Lieutenant, and who, until about 90 minutes ago, was very sure you were a closed file. How did you get this line?" "I have the line." "Who is this?" "Go to the window." She didn't move. "Go to the window, Lieutenant. I'm not going to ask you twice, and the second ask is going to be less polite." She stood up slowly. She walked to the window. The glass was reinforced, triple-paned, tinted. Outside, she could see the parade ground, a flagpole, 2 Humvees, a row of barracks in the middle distance. Nothing unusual, nothing that stood out. "I don't see you," she said. "You're not supposed to. I'm not there. I'm somewhere much more comfortable than a base in Ohio in April. I'm merely observing, through a feed you would find interesting if you had time to think about it. What do you want?" "I want you to understand something very clearly, Lieutenant Whitaker. The man you disarmed in the diner today was not acting alone. You knew that. You said as much to your team. The vest interdiction in the garage was, from my perspective, an acceptable loss. The spotter was an acceptable loss. The driver is, already, in the process of becoming a very tragic suicide in a holding cell at approximately 4:15 this afternoon, so he, also, is an acceptable loss. You're telling me this because I want you to understand, Lieutenant, that I am not a man who panics when he loses a chess piece. I am a man who considers what the loss tells him about the board. And what does it tell you?" "It tells me," the voice said, "that the ghost I have been carrying in the back of my ledger for 3 years is not in fact a ghost. It tells me that I made a mistake in October of 2023, and it tells me that the mistake is correctable." A small, cold thing moved up the base of Claire's spine. "You sold the coordinates," she said. A pause, then a light, almost musical laugh. "Oh, Lieutenant, you are quick. I wondered if you'd put it together that fast. I really did. I said to a colleague of mine just this morning, if she's still the operator she used to be, she'll have it inside 2 hours. And here you are, 18 minutes. You always were the best of Nightingale. That's why Marston wanted you on the ridge." She didn't speak. She couldn't, for a second. The name in his mouth was like ice against a tooth. "What do you want?" she said again. "I want you to know that I know you're alive. I want you to know that I know where you live. I want you to know that the old woman at the diner has grandchildren in Cleveland, one boy, one girl, 8 and 11, and that the 11-year-old has a soccer game on Saturday at 10. I want you to know that I know the name of the charge nurse on the oncology ward at St. Aurelia, and I want you to know that I know which exit you used to leave the hospital and what time. And I want you to know that I know the license plate of the silver Corolla you park 3 blocks away because you don't like to leave it in the staff lot. You're bluffing. I might be. You want to bet the 11-year-old's soccer game on it? Her hand on the phone had gone white at the knuckles. What do you want? She said for the 3rd time. I want you to walk out of that base tomorrow morning. I want you to disappear again. I want you to go back to being nobody. And I want you to understand that if you do not, if you sit down in that chair at 0800 and you start telling General Lassiter everything you know about the night on the ridge, a number of quiet, forgettable people in a number of quiet, forgettable towns are going to stop being alive. Not dramatically, not publicly, just gone. The way dust goes when you wipe a shelf. Are we understanding each other? I'm understanding you perfectly. Good. I want you to understand something too, she said, and her voice was low and very even, and it did not sound like the voice of the nurse at the Blue Kettle. I spent 3 years letting my team stay buried because I thought I was protecting them. I was wrong. I was protecting you, and I didn't know it, but I know it now. And there is not a number of forgettable people in a number of forgettable towns large enough to get you out of the room you just walked yourself into. Oh, Lieutenant, that's very cinematic. Does the line usually work? I don't know. I've never had to use it before. He laughed again, that same soft musical sound, and the line went dead. She stood at the window for another 10 seconds with the dead receiver in her hand. Then she put it back in the cradle. Then she walked fast to the door, which was locked from the outside, and she banged on it hard enough to hurt her palm. The guard opened it. I need Sawyer, she said. Right now, and I need a line to General Lassiter, and I need the name of the driver they pulled out of the van at 5th and Harlow, and I need somebody on the phone to the holding cell where they're keeping him, and I need all of that in the next 90 seconds, because somebody in this building is about to let him die. The guard blinked at her. Ma'am, 90 seconds, specialist, move. He moved. 3.5 minutes later, Sawyer came through the door at a dead run, phone against his ear, and Claire could hear, even across the room, the tinny voice on the other end of the line saying the same 3 words over and over. We're too late. We're too late. We're too late. Sawyer lowered the phone. His face had gone the color of old paper. Hanging, he said. Well, bedsheet. They found him about 6 minutes ago. He didn't hang himself. I know he didn't hang himself. There's somebody inside this building, Sawyer. I know. He called me on the red phone in that room. He knew I was in that room. He had the extension. Sawyer stared at her. Say that again, he said. The red phone. It rang. He knew I was in this building. He knew I was in that specific room. He had the internal extension, and he called me and told me that the driver was about to die at 4:15, and he did, and now he's dead, and somebody in this building gave that man the line to my room. Sawyer closed his eyes for a full 2 seconds, then opened them. Okay, he said. Okay. Up. With me. Now. We are not sleeping here tonight. Where? I don't know yet. Somewhere that isn't here. Lassiter's already on her way back in. She's going to put this base on internal lockdown in about 11 minutes, and I want you off it in 10. They moved. The hallway outside was quieter than it had been earlier, which was wrong, and Claire felt it the way she used to feel a tree line that had too few birds in it. Sawyer felt it too. He had his sidearm out of the holster, not drawn, just out, carried low along his thigh in a way that looked, to a civilian, like a man holding a radio. They walked past the conference room. They walked past the archive. They walked past a pair of MPs who straightened automatically when they saw Sawyer's rank and did not, Claire noted, ask a single question about who the woman in gray sweats beside him was or why she did not have a visitor's badge. That was the second thing that was wrong. Sawyer, she murmured. I see it. They reached the east stairwell. Sawyer pushed the door open with his shoulder, and the instant it cleared an inch, he stopped moving and held out his hand flat behind him, the old signal for freeze. Claire froze. In the narrow gap of the open door, she could see, 3 steps down, the back of a man's head. Not an MP's head. A civilian crew cut. A gray windbreaker. She did not breathe. Sawyer pulled the door back toward him, very slowly, letting the latch click home without a sound, and then he turned around and walked her back the way they had come, at a pace that was not quite running. "West stairwell," he said. "How many?" "I saw one. There'll be more." They were halfway down the corridor when the lights went out. Not all of them. The fluorescent stayed on, but the red strip lighting along the floor, the emergency path to exit markers that were supposed to be on 24 hours a day in a building like this, the ones that were on an entirely separate circuit from the main power for exactly this reason, those went dark. All of them. At once. Somewhere at the far end of the corridor, a door opened. Sawyer stepped in front of her. "Conference 4, he said. "Go. Now. Lock it behind you." "Sawyer, go, Whitaker. Orders." She went. She went because the last time a man in a windbreaker had given her an order with that specific inflection, she had ignored it, and Marston had died on her back 12 hours later, and she had promised herself in an embassy waiting room in a country she was not allowed to name that she was never going to ignore that inflection again. She made conference 4 in 9 strides. The door was unlocked. She pulled it shut behind her, through the deadbolt, and heard in the corridor behind her the first soft cough of a suppressed round going off. Then a second. Then a third. Then silence. She pressed her back against the wall beside the door. She was breathing through her nose, slow and deep. There was no weapon in the conference room. There was a chair, a table, a laptop, a landline, a coffee cup. She picked up the coffee cup. She dumped the cold coffee into the trash can. She gripped the cup by the handle, ceramic, heavy, a decent bludgeon at close range. Footsteps in the corridor. One person, measured, not in a hurry. A knock on the door. "Whitaker," a voice said. It was not the voice from the red phone. It was a new voice, calm, bored. "Open up." She didn't move. "Whitaker, I know you're in there. The sensor in the floor is telling me you are. Open the door, please. I'd prefer not to damage it. It's a nice door." She looked at the landline. She could dial Lassiter. She could dial the base switchboard. She could dial 911 for whatever good that would do on a federal installation. But any of those calls would take 30 seconds to connect, and she had about 8. She looked at the table. The laptop was open. She could see on the screen the ghost of an image she had not closed out of from her earlier tour of this room with Sawyer. The fingerprint scan interface still logged in under Lassiter's credentials. A 3-star command account with permissions that could, among other things, trigger the base-wide lockdown protocol that Sawyer had said was 11 minutes out. She had the credentials. She had the access. She had 8 seconds. She crossed to the laptop. She did not bother with the lockdown. The lockdown would take too long to propagate, and by the time it finished, the man outside the door would be standing over her body. What she did instead was simpler and louder and more surgical. She hit the fire alarm override. Every siren in the building went off at once. Every door that had been auto-locked for security became, by federal code, auto-unlocked for egress. Every sprinkler head on the ceiling began to hiss. Within 3 seconds, the conference room was filling with fine mist, and the corridor outside was, she knew, filling with water and confused soldiers and smoke alarm strobe light and a level of general chaos that no professional killer, no matter how calm, could shoot his way through cleanly. The man on the other side of the door said something she couldn't hear over the siren. Then he put 2 rounds through the door. The rounds punched through the wood at chest height, one above, one below, and buried themselves in the opposite wall. If she had been standing where he expected, she'd have been dead. She was on the floor, belly down against the baseboard, coffee cup clutched in one hand. He kicked the door. The deadbolt held the first kick. It would not hold the second. She got up into a crouch, tight against the hinge side of the door, where the incoming kick would swing the door away from her and give her 3/4 of a second of clean angle on whatever walked through. The second kick came. The door flew open. A man came through it in a low crouch, weapon up, eyes tracking center of room first. She swung the coffee cup in a flat horizontal arc that ended exactly at his right temple. The ceramic shattered. So did something inside his head. He went sideways into the table, and the weapon went one way and he went the other, and Claire was on top of him before he'd finished falling, one knee in his throat, the other on his wrist, the jagged handle of the cup pressed up under the hinge of his jaw. "Who sent you?" she said. He couldn't answer. Her knee was on his windpipe. She eased back a 1/4 inch. "Who sent you?" He smiled, blood in his teeth. "Ma'am," he said, "you can break my wrist, you can break my jaw, you can cut my throat with a coffee cup. You know the protocol. You used to be the protocol. I don't know anything I'd be allowed to tell you, and if I did, I wouldn't. Try me." "He told me," the man said, still smiling, "to tell you that the soccer game is at 10. She went cold. She pressed the jagged edge up under his jaw hard enough to draw a bead of blood. "Who is he?" "You already know who he is, Lieutenant. You just don't want to say it out loud, because when you say it out loud, you're going to have to deal with the fact that the person who sold your team on the ridge didn't need a coordinate from the enemy because he was the coordinate. He was always the coordinate. He walked in the front door with you, and he signed the orders, and he told you when to go, and he told them where to shoot." Her hand on the cup did not move, but her jaw did. "Say the name," she said. He said the name. It was a name she knew. It was a name she had seen in her own personnel file, in the block for reporting officer, on a piece of paperwork she had signed in a room in Virginia a month before the ridge, on a piece of paperwork that had authorized Nightingale to cross a border that, officially, had not been crossed. It was a name that was currently, as far as she knew, sitting in a Senate committee hearing in Washington, testifying under oath about military operational oversight. She let go of the man's wrist. She stood up. She did not take her eyes off him. Out in the corridor somewhere, Sawyer was shouting her name. There was more gunfire, boots, water on concrete, somebody giving orders in a voice she didn't recognize. The man on the floor was still smiling through the blood. "Run, Lieutenant," he said. "It's a big country. If you're fast, you might get 2-3 days out of it." She didn't run. She picked up his weapon from where it had fallen. She checked the chamber. She pressed the magazine release, caught the mag in her left hand, checked the rounds, pushed it back in, racked the slide. All of it with the mechanical familiarity of a person who had forgotten more about sidearms than most people ever learn. She pointed it at him. "Get up," she said. "I can't. I think you broke my—" "Get up!" He got up. She walked him out of the conference room, ahead of her, hands laced behind his head, into a corridor that was knee-deep in chaos and sprinkler water and very confused MPs. Sawyer was there. He had blood on the sleeve of his jacket that was not his. He saw her, saw the weapon, saw the man in front of her, and his face did a thing she had not seen it do in 3 years. "Whitaker," he said. "I need a secure line," she said. "I need it to the office of the Inspector General at the Pentagon. I need it in the next 5 minutes, and I need the call routed through a cutout nobody in this building can touch. And then I need you to put me on a plane." "A plane to where?" "Washington." "Claire, I know what I'm doing, Sawyer." "Do you?" "I know who did it, the Ridge. Marston, the QRF, all of it. I know his name, and I know his office, and I know where he'll be at 0900 tomorrow morning." Sawyer looked at her for a long second. "Who?" he said. She told him. Sawyer went very, very quiet. Then he reached up and took the phone off the wall, punched a 4-digit extension, and said, in a voice she had not heard him use since the Ridge, "This is Sawyer. I need a bird on the pad in 20. Destination Andrews. Passengers 2. Authorization, Lassiter override. Reference conversation this afternoon. Tell her it's about October 23. He listened for a second. Then he said, "No, Major, I'm not going to spell it. If she asks, you tell her the nurse came home. She'll understand." He hung up. He looked at Claire. Behind her, the man with blood in his teeth was still smiling at the floor. The sirens were still going. Somewhere above them, the first of the helicopters they were about to need was spinning up on a pad whose concrete had been poured 8 years before Claire Whitaker had learned how to disappear. Sawyer keyed his radio. "Command, Sawyer. We have a confirmed penetration. Base is hot. I want every entrance locked. I want every civilian off the perimeter, and I want the general on the line in 90 seconds. And command—" He paused. "Get a car to Westbridge. Cleveland direction. There's an 11-year-old with a soccer game on Saturday morning at 10, and we're going to need her and her grandmother and her little brother and every member of their family in protective custody by sundown. Yes, I said sundown. No, Sergeant, I am not asking." He lowered the radio. He looked at Claire one more time. "You sure about this?" he said. She didn't answer right away. She was looking past him, down the corridor, to where, through the thinning mist of the sprinklers, she could see General Lassiter walking toward them at a pace that was not quite a run, her ACS soaked through at the shoulders, her folder held low against her hip, her face set in the specific expression of a woman who had just been told, on a secure line from a helicopter, a name she was going to spend the next 48 hours wishing she had never heard. "Yeah," Claire said softly. "I'm sure." Lassiter reached them. Water was running off the brim of her cover. She looked at Claire. She looked at the man in front of Claire. She looked at the weapon in Claire's hand. She looked at Sawyer. "Tell me," she said. Sawyer told her. Lassiter did not react for a long 3 seconds. Then she pulled the folder tighter against her hip and said, very quietly, "That son of a bitch was at my daughter's wedding." Nobody answered her. Somewhere above them, a rotor began to spin up. The sound of it climbed through the wet concrete walls of the building, and for the first time in a long time, Claire Whitaker, former lieutenant, former ghost, former nurse of the Blue Kettle Diner, felt the dead cold thing in her chest begin, slowly, to warm. She looked at Lassiter. "Get me to Washington," she said, "and get me 5 minutes in a room with him before the press does." Lassiter's mouth twitched. It was not a smile. It was the shape a mouth makes when a person has decided, after a very long day, to stop playing by the book. "5 minutes," the general said, "is generous." She turned on her heel and started walking toward the helipad, and Claire and Sawyer and 2 MPs dragging the bleeding killer between them fell in behind her without needing to be told. And high above the base, through the thinning clouds over central Ohio, the first pink edge of sunset was just beginning to bleed across the horizon, while somewhere in a wood-paneled office in a marble building 1,000 miles east, a man in a tailored suit was finishing his coffee, closing his laptop, and smiling at his chief of staff as he said, very calmly, the sentence that would turn out to be the last mistake he ever made. "Whatever she thinks she knows, she won't make it to Washington." The helicopter cleared the tree line at 7,000 feet and banked east into a sky that had gone the color of a bruise. Claire sat in the jump seat with the headset too tight around her ears and the vibration of the rotor climbing through the soles of her boots. Across from her, Sawyer was on a headset of his own, talking to someone whose voice she couldn't hear, but whose tone she could read in the lines around his mouth. Whatever he was hearing, it wasn't good. The wounded killer sat between 2 MPs, zip-tied at the wrists and ankles, a gauze pad taped to his temple where the coffee cup had split the skin. He wasn't looking at anyone. He was looking at the floor, and his lips were moving in what might have been prayer or might have been a recitation of something he'd memorized for exactly this situation. Claire had seen that look before. It was the look of a man who had already decided he was dead and was now just waiting to find out how long the paperwork would take. Lassiter sat at the front of the cabin with a tablet on her knees and a phone pressed to her ear, and every 30 seconds she would write something down in the kind of shorthand Claire recognized from field notes that weren't supposed to leave the theater. The general's face was blank, the way faces get blank when the person behind them has decided to stop feeling things until the operation is over. The intercom crackled. "General," the pilot said, "we've got an update from Andrews. They're requesting immediate confirmation on passenger manifest and authorization code. Tell them Nightingale actual, authorization Lassiter 619er black." A pause. "Ma'am, they're saying that code's been archived. Tell them to unarchive it." "Yes, ma'am." The line went quiet. Claire looked out the small window at her elbow. Below them, the last of the daylight was disappearing into a quilt of farmland and highway, and the scattered glow of towns too small to have names she would know. Somewhere down there, an 11-year-old girl was being pulled out of her house by people in suits who wouldn't tell her mother why, and her grandmother was probably on the phone to a lawyer she couldn't afford. And none of them had any idea that the reason their lives had just been turned inside out was sitting in a helicopter 40 miles away, holding a stolen sidearm and trying not to think about the fact that the last time she had flown east at this altitude, half her team had been in body bags. Sawyer pulled one side of his headset off. "Claire," she looked at him. "They're saying he's not in Washington." "Who told you that?" "The Senate liaison. He's saying the witness schedule got moved up. Testimony finished this afternoon. He flew back to Langley 2 hours ago." "Langley," she said flatly. "Yeah. He's at Langley right now." "That's what they're telling me." She looked at Lassiter. The general had lowered the phone and was watching her with an expression that was very carefully neutral. "Is that true?" Claire said. "I don't know yet. I've got 3 different people telling me 3 different things, and until I get eyes on a flight manifest, I can't confirm anything. What I can tell you is that if he's smart And he is smart. He'll have gone to ground the second he heard you were alive. And the best ground a man like that has is a building full of people who will shoot you before they let you through the door. Then we go to Langley. We can't go to Langley. Why not? Because Langley is not Fort Halverson, Whitaker. I can't just roll up on the front gate of the Central Intelligence Agency with a resurrected dead woman and a stolen prisoner and ask to see the deputy director. There are protocols, there are channels, there are about 9 different offices I have to notify before I can even think about. He killed my team. Lassiter's mouth tightened. I know. He sold the coordinates. He sent us into that valley knowing exactly what was waiting, and he did it because somebody paid him or somebody owned him, or because he just wanted to see what would happen when you put 6 operators on a ridge with no air support and no QRF, and then he went back to his office and he filed the paperwork, and he stood at the memorial, and he probably cried real tears. And nobody asked him a single hard question because nobody had a reason to. He's been walking free for 3 years, ma'am. I'm not letting him walk for 3 more hours. You don't have a choice. Yes, I do. Whitaker, put me on the ground at Andrews. Give me a car. I'll go alone. Sawyer cut in. The hell you will. Sawyer, no, absolutely not. You walk into Langley without authorization. You're not walking out. You know that. I know you know that. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking fine. You're thinking like somebody who just found out the person who killed her friends is still breathing, and that is not the same thing as thinking clearly. She didn't answer. She was looking at the zip-tied man again. He had stopped moving his lips. He was watching her now, and there was something in his face that might have been pity or might have been recognition. She couldn't tell which, and she didn't care. How many? She said to him. He blinked. How many of you did he send? The man smiled, slow and tired. Enough. Enough for what? Enough that by the time you land, you'll have about 6 different agencies who want to know why a dead lieutenant is flying into Washington on a military helicopter with a 3-star general and a prisoner who doesn't officially exist. Enough that your face is going to be on a watch list by the time you clear the tarmac. Enough that he doesn't have to kill you himself. He just has to let the system do it. Claire leaned forward. What's your name? She said. Doesn't matter. It matters to me. He thought about it, then shrugged. Kessler. Kessler, you got a first name? Paul. Okay, Paul, here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me everywhere he has people. You're going to tell me which offices, which departments, which contractors. You're going to tell me every name you know and every number you've ever called and every safe house you've ever used. And if you do that, I'm going to make sure that when this is over, you get to spend the rest of your life in a federal prison instead of a hole in the ground with no headstone. Kessler laughed. It was a quiet, ugly sound. Lady, you don't have the authority to offer me that. No, but she does. Claire jerked her chin toward Lassiter. And if you think she won't, you didn't see her face when I told her the name. Kessler looked at the general. Lassiter looked back. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her face said everything a man like Kessler needed to hear. He sighed. He's got people in signals, Kessler said. He's got people in the Inspector General's office. He's got a whole network of contractors who don't ask questions because they're getting paid too much to care. He's got senators, plural. He's got at least 1 federal judge I know about, maybe 2. And he's got a line into the White House press office, which means if you go loud, he goes louder, and you'll be a conspiracy theory by dinner time. Where is he right now? I don't know. Yes, you do. I swear to you, I don't. He compartmentalizes. I get a call, I get an address, I do the job, I go home. I don't get briefings. I don't get explanations. He could be in Langley. He could be in a cabin in Montana. He could be on a plane to somewhere that doesn't have an extradition treaty. I genuinely do not know. Claire sat back. Then you're not as useful as I thought. Probably not. The intercom crackled again. General, we're 12 minutes from Andrews. They're asking for final confirmation on the landing authorization. Lassiter keyed her mic. Tell them authorized. Tell them to have 2 unmarked vehicles on the pad, engines running, and tell them to clear the immediate area. No ground crew, no fuelers, nobody. Ma'am, that's going to raise some flags. It's supposed to. I want flags. I want every flag they've got. Lassiter out. She killed the mic and looked at Claire. When we land, she said, you do not leave my sight. You do not speak to anyone I don't clear first. You do not make phone calls. You do not send texts. You do not post anything on social media that has ever existed. As far as the world is concerned, you are still dead, and you stay dead until I say otherwise. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am. Sawyer, you're with her. If she tries to do something stupid, you sit on her. Understood. And Whitaker. Claire looked up. If we're doing this, Lassiter said, we're doing it my way. That means by the book. That means evidence. That means witnesses. That means I don't care how much you want to put a bullet in this man's head. You are not putting a bullet in his head until a judge signs off on it. Do you understand me? Yes, ma'am. Do you? Claire held her gaze. Yes, she said. I do. Lassiter didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway, and she went back to her tablet. And for the next 10 minutes, the only sound in the cabin was the rotor and the wind and the quiet, labored breathing of a man who had tried to kill a nurse with a coffee cup and was now regretting a number of life choices. The helicopter dropped through the cloud deck at 9,000 feet, and the lights of Washington came up like a constellation somebody had spilled across the eastern seaboard. Claire had been to Washington exactly 3 times in her life. Once for advanced training, once for a medal she hadn't wanted, once for a briefing she wasn't allowed to talk about. She had not liked it any of those times, and she did not like it now. The city looked, from the air, like the kind of place where people made decisions that got other people killed and then went home and slept fine. Andrews came up fast. The pilot brought them in low over the perimeter fence and set down on a pad that was, as promised, completely empty, except for 2 black SUVs idling 30 yards away. The rotors were still spinning down when Lassiter popped the door and dropped onto the tarmac like she'd done it 1,000 times. Sawyer went next, then Claire, then the 2 MPs dragging Kessler between them. The air smelled like jet fuel and rain that hadn't started yet. A man in a dark suit was standing beside the lead SUV. He did not look happy. He looked like a man who had been pulled out of a dinner reservation to meet a helicopter he hadn't been briefed on, and he was holding a phone in one hand like he was deciding whether to make a call or throw the phone into the nearest trash can. Lassiter walked straight to him. "Colonel Braddock," she said. "General, I need to know what the hell is going on. You need to know I'm invoking operational security under Title 50, Section 1204, and that every person on this tarmac is now under my direct command until I say otherwise." Braddock stared at her. "Ma'am, I don't have the authority to—" "You do now. Call your CO if you want confirmation. Call the Joint Chiefs if you want a second opinion. But while you're doing that, I'm getting in that vehicle, and I'm driving off this base, and if you try to stop me, I'm going to have you arrested for obstruction of a classified operation." "A classified? Call it in, Colonel. I'll wait." Braddock looked at her, then at Claire, then at Kessler, who was dripping blood onto the tarmac and smiling like he was watching a movie he'd already seen. Braddock made the call. It took 90 seconds. When he hung up, his face had gone from irritated to pale. "You're cleared," he said quietly. "They want a full debrief within 24 hours. They'll get one. General, if I can ask—" "You can't." Lassiter walked past him and climbed into the lead SUV. Sawyer got in beside her. Claire got in the back. The MPs loaded Kessler into the second vehicle and slammed the door, and both SUVs peeled out in unison. No lights, no sirens, just 2 black shapes disappearing into the Capitol night like stones dropping into water. Claire watched the base recede through the rear window. She could see Braddock standing on the tarmac with his phone still in his hand, and she wondered briefly what he was going to write in the report and whether anyone would believe him. Sawyer turned around in the front seat. "Where are we going?" he said to Lassiter. "The Hoover Building." "FBI?" "I've got a friend in counterintelligence. He owes me. More importantly, he's not on anybody's payroll except the one that matters." "You trust him?" "I trust him more than I trust anyone at Langley right now." The SUV turned onto the parkway. The driver was military, maybe Air Force, and he drove the way people drive when they've been told not to get pulled over under any circumstances. Fast, but not reckless. Smooth, but not slow. Claire's phone buzzed. She didn't have a phone. She'd left it in her locker at St. Aurelia 3 days ago and hadn't thought about it since. But the phone in her pocket, someone's phone, a burner maybe, something Sawyer must have slipped to her during the scramble at Fort Halverson, buzzed once, twice, 3 times. She pulled it out. A text. No number, just a message. "You made it to Washington." Impressive. "But you're still 3 steps behind, and you're about to walk into a building that has 6 of my people in it. Turn around. Go home. Last chance. She showed it to Sawyer. He read it, then handed it to Lassiter. The general read it without changing expression. Then she rolled down the window and threw the phone out into the middle of the parkway, where it shattered under the wheels of a semi doing 70. No phones, she said. No electronics. From here on out, if it's got a battery, it doesn't come in the room. Ma'am, Sawyer said carefully, he's not bluffing about the Hoover building. I know. If he's got people inside, then we'll find out who they are. That's the point. That's a hell of a risk. Yes, it is. Claire leaned forward. General, he's right. If we walk in there cold, we're not walking in cold. I've got a call in to the director. I've got a second call in to the deputy AG. By the time we're through the front door, every agent in that building is going to know there's an active internal investigation, and anyone who so much as looks at you wrong is going to have their clearance suspended before they can blink. And if that's not enough, Lassiter turned in her seat and looked Claire in the eye. Then you better hope that coffee cup trick works twice. The SUV slowed. They were in the city now, past the monuments, past the tourists, into the part of Washington that looked like every other government district in every other capital. Concrete, glass, American flags, surveillance cameras every 20 feet. The Hoover building rose up on the left, a brutal gray slab of a structure that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated beauty and wanted everyone else to hate it too. The driver pulled into an underground garage. A gate rolled up. They descended 2 levels into a parking structure that smelled like oil and old cigarettes, and had exactly 4 other vehicles in it, all of them federal plates. A woman in a dark blazer was waiting by the elevator. She had a lanyard around her neck, and the kind of posture that came from too many years sitting at a desk under fluorescent lights. She did not smile when Lassiter got out of the SUV. General? Agent Russo. Director wants to see you immediately. 3rd floor, conference room B. He's not happy. He'll get over it. He's saying you've got about 15 minutes before he has to brief the AG, and the AG is going to want to know why a 3-star general just rolled into the Hoover building with a fugitive and a ghost. Lassiter didn't break stride. Tell him the ghost has a name, and the name is going to end a lot of careers if he doesn't shut the door and listen. Russo looked at Claire, then at Sawyer, then at the MPs hauling Kessler out of the 2nd SUV. What the hell did you bring me, General? Justice, Lassiter said. You coming or not? Russo sighed and hit the elevator call button. They rode up in silence. The elevator was too small for 6 people, and Kessler was starting to smell like sweat and gauze and the iron tang of drying blood. One of the MPs was breathing through his mouth. Claire kept her eyes on the floor numbers as they climbed. 3, 4, 5. The door opened on the 3rd floor. The hallway was empty. Too empty. Claire had been in enough federal buildings to know that they were never this quiet, even at night. There should have been night staff, cleaning crews, someone walking past with a file box or a cup of coffee. But the hallway was silent, and the lights at the far end were off, and somewhere behind the walls she could hear the hum of HVAC and nothing else. Where is everyone? Sawyer said quietly. Director cleared the floor, Russo said. Said he didn't want anyone in earshot. That's not standard procedure. Nothing about tonight is standard procedure. They walked past 3 closed doors and stopped at the 4th. Russo knocked twice, opened it without waiting for an answer, and stepped aside. The conference room was long and narrow, with a table that could seat 20 and windows that overlooked Pennsylvania Avenue. At the far end of the table sat a man in his early 60s, gray hair, reading glasses on a chain around his neck, the kind of face that belonged on a coin or a courtroom sketch. He was holding a pen in one hand and a folder in the other, and when he looked up at Lassiter, his expression was the specific kind of tired that comes from spending 30 years in law enforcement and realizing, very late in the game, that some of the people you trusted were the ones you should have been investigating. General Lassiter, he said, sit down, and tell me why I shouldn't have you arrested for about 9 different violations of federal protocol. Lassiter sat. Because the woman standing next to me is Lieutenant Claire Whitaker, formerly of Unit Nightingale, who was declared killed in action in October of 2023, and who, as of about 6 hours ago, stopped a domestic terror attack in Westbridge, Ohio. The director looked at Claire. Prove it, he said. Lassiter slid a file across the table. The director opened it. He read the first page, then the second. His jaw tightened. "This is a DD 1400, he said slowly. "A death certificate, signed by a medical examiner in Germany, countersigned by a commanding officer." "Keep reading." He turned the page. His hand stopped moving. "Who countersigned this?" he said. "You see the name." He looked up. His face had gone the color of old paste. "You're telling me," he said very carefully, "that the deputy director of the Central Intelligence Agency personally signed off on the death certificate of a woman who is currently standing in my conference room." "I'm telling you," Lassiter said, "that he didn't just sign it, he wrote it. He fabricated the entire file. He's the one who sold the coordinates that got her team killed, and he's the one who's been covering it up for 3 years. And he's the one who sent a kill team to Fort Halverson this afternoon to make sure she didn't live long enough to tell anyone." The director set the pen down very slowly. "Do you have evidence?" he said. "I have her. I have a prisoner who can name names, and I have a paper trail that's going to lead straight back to his office if you give me the resources to follow it." The director looked at Claire again. "Lieutenant," he said, "is what she's saying true?" Claire stepped forward. She put both hands on the table. She looked him in the eye. "Yes, sir," she said. "Every word." He studied her for a long moment. Then he closed the folder. "Agent Russo," he said, "lock the door. I don't want anyone in or out of this room until I say so. General, you've got 30 minutes to walk me through everything you know, and then I'm going to make some phone calls that are going to ruin a lot of people's evenings. And Lieutenant, sir, welcome back from the dead." Claire didn't smile. She just nodded once, and she sat down. And for the next 28 minutes, she told a story she had been carrying for 3 years. A story about a ridge and a team, and a set of coordinates that had come from a man in a suit who had shaken her hand the day before she deployed and told her he'd see her when she got home. When she was finished, the room was silent. The director took off his glasses. He rubbed his eyes. He looked like a man who had just aged 10 years in half an hour. "How sure are you?" he said. "I'm sure," Claire said, "because if you're wrong—" "I'm not wrong." He looked at Lassiter. "General? She's not wrong." He nodded slowly. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the street below. The city was lit up like a carnival. Somewhere out there, people were having dinner, watching movies, going to bed. Somewhere out there, the man whose name was in the folder was sitting in an office or a car or a safe house, waiting to see if the nurse from Ohio was going to make it through the night. "All right," the director said. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put a warrant together. I'm going to call a federal judge who I know for a fact is not on anyone's payroll, and I'm going to get it signed tonight. I'm going to assemble a team, not from this building, from field offices, people I trust, and we're going to move on his location simultaneously. Langley, his home, his car, anywhere he might run. We do it fast, we do it clean, and we do it before he knows we're coming." "He already knows we're coming," Claire said. "Then we do it faster." Sawyer spoke up. "Sir, with respect, if you're assembling a team, it's going to take time. Hours, maybe. And every hour is another hour he has to disappear." "You have a better idea?" Sawyer looked at Claire. Claire looked back. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I do." The director turned around. "I'm listening. You put out a public statement. Tonight. Right now. You say the FBI is opening an investigation into irregularities in the Nightingale incident. You don't name him. You don't name anyone. You just say it's active, it's ongoing, and anyone with information should come forward. You leak it to the press. You make sure it's on every news site by midnight. That'll spook him. That's the point. If he thinks the story's about to break, he'll run. And when he runs, he'll make a mistake. He'll call someone he shouldn't. He'll go somewhere he shouldn't. He'll do something we can track, and when he does, you've got him." The director shook his head. "That's a gamble." "Everything's a gamble. But the alternative is waiting for him to get on a plane to a country that won't send him back, and then you've got nothing." He thought about it. 30 seconds. A minute. Then he picked up the phone on the table and dialed a 4-digit extension. "This is the director. I need the press office. Right now." He waited. "Jim, it's me. I need you to draft a statement. No, tonight. I need it in the next 20 minutes, and I need it on every wire service you can reach. It's about a classified operation." "Yeah, I know. Do it anyway." He hung up. He looked at Claire. "If this goes sideways," he said, "it's on you." "I know." And if it works, you're going to have to testify publicly, in front of Congress, in front of the press, in front of everyone. You ready for that? She thought about Ramsey. She thought about Maribel. She thought about the little boy at the counter with his eyes closed, counting. Yeah, she said. I'm ready. The director nodded. Then let's end this. He walked out of the room. Russo followed. The door closed behind them, and for the first time in hours, Claire was alone with Sawyer and Lassiter and two MPs who were pretending very hard not to be listening. Sawyer looked at her. You know he's not going to run, he said quietly. I know. You know he's going to come for you. I know that too. Then why? Because I want him to. Lassiter, who had been silent for the last 10 minutes, finally spoke. Whitaker, she said, what are you planning? Claire met her eyes. I'm planning, she said slowly, to be exactly where he expects me to be, doing exactly what he expects me to do, so that when he makes his move, I'm ready. That's not a plan. That's bait. Yeah. You're using yourself as bait. It's a good bait. It's a stupid bait. It's the only bait we've got. Lassiter stood up. She walked around the table and stopped in front of Claire, close enough that Claire could see the deep lines around her eyes, the kind of lines that came from too many years of sending people into places they didn't come back from. I already buried you once, Lassiter said quietly. I'm not doing it again. You won't have to. You don't know that. No. But I know that if I don't do this, he walks. And if he walks, someone else dies. Someone else gets sold. Someone else's team gets put on a ridge with bad coordinates and no support. And 3 years from now, some other general is going to stand at a podium and use the word selfless sacrifice, and I'm not letting that happen. Lassiter stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned to Sawyer. Stay with her, she said. Every second. You do not let her out of your sight. Yes, ma'am. And if she tries to do something brave and stupid, you knock her out and carry her to the nearest secure location. Are we clear? Crystal. Lassiter walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the handle. Whitaker, she said. Ma'am. When this is over, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about what the word orders means. Yes, ma'am. The general walked out. The room went quiet. Sawyer sat down across from Claire and folded his hands on the table. So, he said, what's the real plan? That was the real plan. No, it wasn't. That was the version you tell the 3-star so she doesn't have you sedated. What's the version you tell me? Claire looked at him. She'd known Sawyer for 11 years. He'd been her team lead, her mentor, the man who taught her how to clear a building and how to read a terrain map and how to keep breathing when everything around you was on fire. He knew her better than anyone left alive. She couldn't lie to him. She didn't try. He's going to send someone for me tonight, she said. Probably within the next 2 hours. Probably while we're still in this building. And when they come, I'm going to let them get close. Close enough to think they've won. And then I'm going to make them tell me where he is. How? The same way I made Kessler tell me. Kessler told you because you had Lassiter standing behind you with the authority to cut deals. You're not going to have that at 2 a.m. in a parking garage. I'll have something better. What? She looked down at her hands. They were steady. They had been steady since the diner, since the conference room, since the helicopter. They would stay steady, she thought, until this was over. And then maybe they would shake, and she would let them, and she would deal with that when it happened. I'll have nothing left to lose, she said. Sawyer didn't answer for a long time. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Yeah, you do, he said quietly. You've got me. You've got Lassiter. You've got a whole lot of people who just found out you're alive and who are going to be really pissed off if you die again, so don't. She almost smiled. Didn't quite make it. I'll try. Good. The door opened. Russo stuck her head in. We've got movement, she said. Statement just hit the wires. Every major outlet's running it. AP, Reuters, all of them. We're about to get a lot of phone calls. Good, Sawyer said. Also, we've got a problem. What kind of problem? The kind where our servers just flagged an unauthorized access attempt from inside the building. Someone tried to pull Lieutenant Whitaker's personnel file about 4 minutes ago. Claire stood up. Where? She said. 6th floor, Terminal 22. It's a public workstation, no assigned user. Anyone with a badge could have logged in. Are they still there? I don't know. I've got security checking now. Claire was already moving. She crossed the room in 3 strides, pulled the door open, and was in the hallway before Sawyer could tell her to wait. "Whitaker!" he shouted. She didn't stop. She ran. The hallway was still empty. She hit the stairwell at a dead sprint, took the stairs 2 at a time, came out on the 6th floor into another empty corridor. The lights were on. The air smelled like toner and old coffee. At the far end of the hall, a door marked Records was propped open with a trash can. She slowed, pulled the sidearm she'd taken off Kessler, checked the chamber, moved toward the door. Behind her, she could hear Sawyer coming up the stairs, calling her name, but she was already through the door and into the records room, and what she saw stopped her cold. The room was full of file cabinets, computer terminals, shelves stacked with binders. At the far end, one of the terminals was still lit, the screen showing a search interface with her name in the query field. The chair was empty, but on the desk, next to the keyboard, was a phone, not a work phone, a personal cell. Screen facing up, unlocked. A single message displayed, Terminal 22, 6th floor, records room. You have 30 seconds before the building locks down and you're trapped inside with people who won't let you leave. The side exit on the east stairwell is still clear. Run now or die here. Your choice. She stared at the phone. 20 seconds. Sawyer came through the door behind her, breathing hard. Claire. She held up a hand. 10 seconds. She looked at the phone, then at the terminal, then at the door. Sawyer saw the message. Don't, he said. He's giving me a way out. It's a trap. Everything's a trap. 5 seconds. Somewhere in the building, an alarm began to sound. Not the fire alarm, something else. A low, pulsing tone that meant lockdown. That meant every door in the building was about to seal. That meant anyone inside was about to become a guest of the Federal Bureau of Investigation until someone in a suit decided otherwise. Claire looked at Sawyer. I'm sorry, she said. And she ran. She ran for the east stairwell, hit the door at full speed, took the stairs down 3, 4, 5 flights, came out into a loading bay that smelled like diesel and rain. The side exit was there, just like the message had said. It was propped open with a cinder block. She went through it. Outside, the rain had started. She could hear sirens in the distance. She could hear shouting from inside the building. She could hear Sawyer, somewhere above her, screaming her name into a radio. And standing in the alley 20 feet away, under the flicker of a failing streetlight, was a man in a gray suit with his hands in his pockets, and a smile that looked like it had been carved into his face with a very dull knife. Hello, Lieutenant, he said. She raised the weapon. He didn't move. You can shoot me, he said pleasantly, but you won't, because you want to know where he is more than you want me dead, and I'm the only person in this alley who can tell you. She kept the weapon steady. Talk, she said. He's not in Langley. He's not in Washington. He's exactly where you'd go if you were him, somewhere no one's looking, somewhere no one would think to look, because it's the last place anyone would expect a man like him to hide. Where? The man in the gray suit smiled wider. Westbridge, he said. He's in Westbridge, Ohio, at St. Aurelia Medical Center, and he's been there since this afternoon. Claire's heart stopped. You're lying, am I? Call the hospital. Ask for Dr. Emil Voss, visiting consultant cardiology wing. See who answers. She didn't move. The man took a step forward, then another. He stopped just outside arm's reach. He knew you'd come to Washington, he said softly. He knew you'd go to the FBI. He knew you'd do exactly what you did because that's what soldiers do. They follow the chain. They trust the system. But he also knew that the one place you'd never think to look for him was the one place you thought was safe. Your hospital, your city, your people. He's there right now, Lieutenant, sitting in your break room, drinking your coffee, waiting to see if you're smart enough to figure it out before he finishes what he started 3 years ago. The rain was coming down harder now. Claire could feel it soaking through her shirt, cold against her skin. Why are you telling me this? She said. The man shrugged. Because he told me to. Because he wants you to come. Because he's done running, and so are you, and the only way this ends is if the two of you are in the same room. He turned and started walking toward the far end of the alley. East Garage, he called back over his shoulder. Black sedan, keys in the ignition. It's a 3-hour drive if you're fast. 4 if you're careful. He'll still be there either way. And then he was gone, swallowed by the rain and the dark. Claire stood there, weapons still raised, water running down her face. Behind her, she heard boots. Sawyer. Russo. Maybe more. She had about 10 seconds to decide. She ran for the garage. The black sedan was exactly where the man in the gray suit had said it would be. Third row from the exit, engine still warm. Claire pulled the door open and dropped into the driver's seat, and she was turning the key before her other hand had even closed the door. The engine caught. The headlights came on. Behind her, somewhere in the rain, she could hear Sawyer shouting her name, but she was already reversing out of the space, already throwing the transmission into drive, already gone. The garage exit spat her out onto a side street she didn't recognize. She turned left because left looked empty, punched the accelerator, and merged into late-night Washington traffic with the kind of reckless precision that came from driving convoy in places where stopping at a red light could get you killed. 2 blocks later, she was on the highway. 3 blocks after that, she was doing 80. Her phone, the second burner Sawyer had given her, the one she'd forgotten was in her jacket pocket, buzzed against her ribs. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen. Sawyer. She answered. "Don't," he said. No preamble, no pleasantries, just that one word, raw and furious. "I'm already gone." "I know you're already gone. I'm watching you on the traffic cams. You're northbound on 95 doing about 90 and a 50. You want to tell me what the hell you're thinking?" "I'm thinking he's at my hospital. And I'm thinking that's exactly what he wants you to think." "He's there, Sawyer. You don't know that." "Yeah, I do." A long pause. She could hear him breathing, could hear the background noise of the Hoover building, voices shouting, radios crackling. "Claire," he said, quieter now, "if you drive into that hospital alone, you're not walking out." "Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. He's had 3 hours to set it up. 3 hours to put people in every hallway, every stairwell, every exit. You go in there, and it's a kill box." "Then I guess I better be faster than they are." "This isn't a joke. I'm not joking." She heard him say something to someone else, a muffled exchange she couldn't make out. Then he was back. "Lassiter's calling in a tactical team. FBI, DOD, I don't know yet, but they'll be wheels up in 20 minutes. You wait for them. You let them clear the building. You do not go in there alone." "How long until they get to Westbridge?" 2 hours? Maybe less?" "He'll be gone in 2 hours." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. He's not sitting in a hospital waiting for the FBI to knock on the door. He's waiting for me, and if I don't show, he walks, and we never see him again." Sawyer swore, low and vicious. "You're going to get yourself killed." "Probably. And you're okay with that." She thought about it. Rain hammered the windshield. The wipers were on full speed and barely keeping up. The highway was empty except for a semi in the slow lane and a pair of taillights half a mile ahead. "No," she said finally. "But I'm more okay with it than I am with letting him disappear. Claire, I'm hanging up now." "Wait." She hung up. She dropped the phone on the passenger seat and pressed the accelerator down another inch. The speedometer climbed past 95. The engine was loud, a deep rattling hum that she could feel in her teeth. She didn't know what kind of car this was. She didn't care. It was fast and it was pointed north, and that was enough. The highway unreeled in front of her like a ribbon someone was pulling taut. She passed the semi. She passed the taillights. She passed a rest stop, a town, a stretch of forest that looked black and infinite in the rain. Her hands on the wheel were steady. Her breathing was steady. Everything inside her that had been coiled tight since the diner, since the helicopter, since the man on the red phone, was now humming at a frequency she recognized. A frequency she had not felt in 3 years but had never forgotten. She was operational again. Somewhere behind her, Sawyer was coordinating with Lassiter. Somewhere behind her, a tactical team was gearing up. Somewhere behind her, the entire weight of the federal government was beginning to turn in the direction of a deputy director who had spent 3 years thinking he was untouchable. But out here, on this highway, in this rain, it was just her and the road and the man waiting at the end of it. She made Westbridge in 2 hours and 40 minutes. The city came up slow, first as a glow on the horizon, then as streetlights, then as the familiar grid of roads she had driven 100 times on her way to and from the hospital. It was just past midnight. The streets were empty. The rain had followed her north and was now coming down in sheets, turning the intersections into shallow lakes. She took the east access road that ran behind St. Aurelia and parked 3 blocks away in the lot of a closed pharmacy. Killed the engine. Sat in the dark and listened to the rain and tried to think. The hospital was a 6-story building shaped like a blocky letter H. The main entrance was on the south side, always staffed, always visible. The emergency entrance was on the west, same deal. The service entrance was on the north, card access only, but she had a card, or at least she used to. If they hadn't deactivated it in the chaos of the last 12 hours, it would still work. That was the way in. The way out was a different problem. She checked the sidearm. Full magazine. 1 in the chamber. 16 rounds total. Not a lot. Not nearly enough if Sawyer was right, and the building was full of people waiting for her. But if they were waiting for her, they were waiting in the wrong place. They were waiting at the entrances, at the elevators, at the places a normal person would go. She wasn't a normal person. She was a woman who had walked out of a war zone with a dead man on her back and lived in a building like this for 2 years without anyone noticing she didn't belong. She knew the blind spots. She got out of the car. The rain hit her like a fist. She was soaked in seconds. She crossed the street at a jog, stayed close to the buildings, moved through the parking lot in the shadow of the dumpsters and the loading bay. The service entrance was exactly where she remembered it. She pulled the card from her wallet. Still there, still laminated, still bearing the name Whitaker C. And a photo from 3 years ago when her hair had been longer and her eyes had been different. She swiped it. The light turned green. She pulled the door open and stepped into the warm, antiseptic quiet of the hospital at night. The hallway was empty. Fluorescent lights overhead, linoleum underfoot, the distant sound of a television playing in a break room somewhere. She moved left, toward the service elevator, the one the cleaning crews used, the one that didn't have a camera pointed at it because nobody important ever used it. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor. She stepped out into another empty hallway. Cardiology was 2 doors down on the right. She could see the light spilling out from under the door, could hear the faint murmur of voices inside. She stopped at the door, put her hand on the handle, took a breath, pushed it open. The break room was small, just a table, a counter, a coffee maker that was always on. Sitting at the table, with his back to the door, was a man in a dark suit. Not the man in the gray suit from the alley. Someone else. Older. Silver hair. Reading a newspaper like he had all the time in the world. He didn't turn around. "Lieutenant Whitaker," he said. "Right on time." She stepped inside and let the door close behind her. "Where is he?" The man folded the newspaper and set it on the table. Then he turned around, and Claire found herself looking at a face she had not seen in 3 years but had thought about every single day since. Deputy Director Emil Voss. He looked older than she remembered, thinner. There were deep lines around his mouth that hadn't been there before. And his eyes had the flat, exhausted look of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally decided to set it down. "Hello, Claire," he said. She raised the weapon. "Hands on the table." He put his hands on the table, palms down, fingers spread. "You can shoot me if you want," he said, "but I'd prefer you didn't. I've had a very long day and I'm tired, and I think we both deserve to have a conversation before anyone does anything permanent. I don't want a conversation. I want you in handcuffs. And you'll have that. In about," he glanced at his watch, "90 minutes when the FBI gets here. Until then, you and I are going to sit in this room, and I'm going to tell you some things you don't know, and you're going to decide whether you still want to shoot me when I'm finished. I already know everything I need to know." "Do you? You sold us. You sent us into that valley knowing we'd die. You faked my death certificate. You've been covering it up for 3 years, and when I came back, you tried to have me killed." Voss nodded slowly. "All true," he said, "and all incomplete." She didn't lower the weapon. "Start talking." Voss leaned back in his chair. He looked at her the way a teacher looks at a student who's about to learn something they won't like. "The coordinates weren't sold, Claire. They were traded. And they weren't traded by me. They were traded by someone much higher up the chain. Someone who needed a black operation to go sideways in exactly the right way, at exactly the right time, to justify a budget increase and a policy shift that had been stuck in committee for 18 months. Your team wasn't collateral damage. Your team was the point." Claire's hand tightened on the grip. "You're lying." "I'm not. I wish I was." But the truth is that Unit Nightingale was never about the mission. It was about proving that elite medical support in denied territory was too dangerous, too expensive, and too politically risky. You were supposed to fail. And when you didn't fail, when you dragged Marston halfway across a mountain and almost made it out, you became a problem. So you killed me. So I saved you. The people who wanted you dead weren't going to stop at a death certificate, Claire. They were going to make sure there wasn't enough of you left to bury. I wrote that certificate because it was the only way to get them to stop looking. I declared you KIA because it was the only way to keep you alive. She stared at him. You expect me to believe that? I expect you to think about it. I expect you to ask yourself why. If I wanted you dead, I would have sent a kill team to Fort Halverson that was sloppy enough to get caught. I expect you to ask yourself why. If I wanted you dead, I would have told the man in the alley exactly where I was and exactly how to find me. Because you're setting a trap. No. Because I'm tired of running, and I'm tired of lying, and I'm tired of watching good people die for bad policy. I spent 3 years keeping you buried because I thought that was the kindest thing I could do. I was wrong. And now I'm here, in your hospital, waiting for you to do what you should have done 3 years ago. Which is what? Burn it all down. The room went very quiet. Claire could hear the rain against the window. She could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. She could hear her own heartbeat, slow and steady. Who? She said. Senator Graham Tolliver, Armed Services Committee. He's the one who authorized the operation. He's the one who leaked the grid. He's the one who's been covering it up. And he's the one who will do anything to make sure it stays covered, because if it comes out, he's not just losing his seat. He's going to prison for the rest of his life. Claire's mouth went dry. Tolliver. Yes. You have proof. Voss reached slowly into his jacket. Claire's finger moved to the trigger. Carefully, she said. He pulled out a flash drive. Set it on the table. Emails, recordings, financial transfers, everything I've been collecting for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to use it. It's all here, and it's all yours. She didn't move. Why now? Because you came back. Because the second you walked into that diner and stopped that attack, you proved that the story they told about you was a lie. And once one lie falls apart, the rest of them follow. Tolliver knows that. That's why he's been trying to kill you. That's why he sent Kessler and the man in the gray suit and everyone else. He knows that if you testify, if you tell your story, the whole thing collapses. So you're using me. I'm helping you. There's a difference. Is there? Voss leaned forward. Claire, I have done a lot of things I'm not proud of. I have lied to people who trusted me. I have signed papers that got people killed. I have spent 3 years looking at your name on a casualty list and knowing it was there because of me. But I have also spent 3 years making sure that when the truth came out, and it was always going to come out, there would be enough evidence to take down everyone responsible, not just me, not just Tolliver, everyone. He pushed the flash drive across the table. This is my resignation, he said quietly. This is my confession. This is everything. You take it to the FBI, you take it to the press, you take it to Congress. I don't care. Just make sure it sees daylight. Claire looked at the flash drive, then at him. You're not walking away from this. I know. You're going to prison. I know that too. Then why? Voss smiled, and it was the saddest thing she had seen in a long time. Because Marston had a son, he said. And I've been looking at his picture on my desk for 3 years, and I can't do it anymore. The door behind Claire opened. She spun, weapon up, and found herself facing Sawyer. He was soaked through, breathing hard, and he had his own sidearm drawn and pointed at Voss. Step away from him, Sawyer said. Sawyer, step away, Claire. Right now! She stepped away. Sawyer moved into the room, weapon steady, eyes locked on Voss. Hands behind your head. Do it slow. Voss complied. Sawyer pulled a zip tie from his belt and secured Voss's wrists behind his back with the kind of efficiency that came from doing it 1,000 times. You're under arrest, Sawyer said. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to— I know my rights, Voss said quietly. And I waive them. I'll tell you everything. I'll testify. I'll give you names, dates, places. Just get me in front of a judge before Tolliver finds out I'm in custody. Sawyer looked at Claire. What's on the drive? He said. He says it's everything. Emails, recordings, proof that Tolliver ordered the hit on Nightingale. You believe him? She looked at Voss. The man was staring at the floor, hands bound, shoulders slumped. He looked like a man who had been carrying a weight for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Yeah, she said. I do. Sawyer holstered his weapon, pulled out his phone, dialed. Lassiter, it's Sawyer. We've got him. St. Aurelia, 4th floor, cardiology break room. And we've got something else, something you're going to want to see. He listened for a moment. No, ma'am, she's fine. She's standing right here. No, I don't know how she got here before the tactical team. Yes, ma'am. I'll ask her. He lowered the phone. General wants to know if you have a death wish. Tell her I'm working on it. Sawyer almost smiled. Then he put the phone back to his ear and walked to the far side of the room, and Claire was left standing next to a man who had spent 3 years pretending she was dead. Why didn't you just come forward? She said quietly. Voss looked up at her. Because if I had, they would have killed you for real. Tolliver has people everywhere. People in the FBI, people in DOD, people in places you've never heard of. The only reason you're alive right now is because he thought you were already dead. The second I went public, you'd have been a loose end, and loose ends don't survive in this business. So you kept me buried. I kept you safe. There's a difference. Is there? Ask Marston's son. Claire's jaw tightened. Don't. Ask him if he'd rather have his father alive or a flag in a box. Ask him if he'd trade 3 years of not knowing for 30 seconds of having his dad walk through the door. You think I don't know what I did to you? You think I don't see your face every time I close my eyes? I made a choice, Claire. It was a bad choice, but it was the only choice that kept you breathing. She didn't answer. She couldn't. The door opened again. This time it was Lassiter, flanked by 2 MPS and an FBI agent Claire didn't recognize. The general took one look at Voss in zip ties, one look at the flash drive on the table, and one look at Claire standing there with a weapon in her hand and rain dripping off her jacket, and her expression went from controlled fury to something colder. Sawyer, she said, secure the prisoner. Agent Russo, I want that flash drive in an evidence bag and on a plane to Washington in the next 10 minutes. And someone get Lieutenant Whitaker a blanket before she catches pneumonia. I'm fine, Claire said. You're soaking wet and you just drove 3 hours to arrest a man by yourself. You're not fine. Sit down. Claire sat. Lassiter pulled up a chair across from her. For a long moment, the general just looked at her, the way a commanding officer looks at a soldier who has just done something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid at the same time. You disobeyed a direct order, Lassiter said. Yes, ma'am. You fled a federal facility. Yes, ma'am. You drove a stolen vehicle across state lines. It wasn't stolen. The keys were in it. That's not how it works, Whitaker. No, ma'am. Lassiter's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. It might have been something else. I should have you court-martialed. Yes, ma'am. But I'm not going to. Do you know why? Because you need me to testify. Because you were right. Voss was here. Tolliver's dirty. And if you hadn't driven up here alone like a lunatic, we'd still be in Washington playing phone tag with lawyers. So instead of a court-martial, you're getting a commendation. And you're going to hate every second of it. Claire almost laughed. Didn't quite make it. Yes, ma'am. Lassiter stood. Agent Russo is going to take your statement, then you're going to get some sleep. Then tomorrow morning, you and I are going to sit down with the Inspector General and the Senate Ethics Committee, and you're going to tell them everything. All of it. On the record. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am. The general walked to the door, stopped, turned back. Whitaker. Ma'am, your Aunt Dee called my office about 6 hours ago. She wanted to know if the woman on the news who stopped a terror attack in Westbridge was the same Claire Whitaker she buried 3 years ago. I told her I'd get back to her. I think it's time I did. Claire's throat went tight. I'll call her. Good, because if I have to eat pot roast with that woman one more time and pretend I don't know where you are, I'm going to lose my mind. Lassiter walked out. The room emptied slowly. The MPs took Voss. Russo took the flash drive. Sawyer stayed because Sawyer always stayed, and when the door finally closed and it was just the two of them, he sat down across from her and let out a breath that sounded like it had been building for 3 years. You scared the hell out of me, he said. I know. Don't do it again. I'll try. That's not good enough. It's all I've got. He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over hers, the same way he'd done in the helicopter, and she realized for the first time that she was shaking. "You did good, Claire," he said quietly. "Marston would be proud." She nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. Outside, the rain was starting to slow. Somewhere in the building, a phone was ringing. Somewhere in Washington, a senator was about to have a very bad morning. And somewhere in a cemetery in Virginia, there was a headstone with her name on it that was about to need a revision. But here, in this room, in this moment, Claire Whitaker was alive. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. The door opened one more time. Agent Russo stuck her head in. "General wants you both downstairs," she said. "We've got a situation." Sawyer was on his feet immediately. "What kind of situation?" "The kind where Senator Tolliver just walked into the FBI field office in Columbus and is demanding to speak to whoever's in charge of the Nightingale investigation. He's got 3 lawyers with him and a camera crew outside, and he's saying he wants to make a statement." Claire stood up slowly. "He's going offensive." "Looks like it. Does he know we have Voss?" "I don't think so. The arrest hasn't hit the wires yet. Far as he knows, he's still in control of the narrative." Sawyer looked at Claire. "What do you want to do?" She thought about it. Thought about the man in the gray suit. Thought about Kessler. Thought about the red phone in the soccer game and the 11-year-old girl who was probably sitting in a safe house right now wondering why her grandmother was crying. "I want to be in that room when he makes his statement," she said. "You sure?" "Yeah." "Claire, if he sees you, then he sees me, and he knows it's over." Russo looked at Sawyer. Sawyer looked at Russo. Some silent conversation happened between them that Claire wasn't part of. "All right," Russo said. "But you're coming in the back, and you're staying out of sight until the general gives the word. Understood?" "Understood." They walked out of the break room down the hallway, into the service elevator. The doors closed. The elevator descended. And somewhere above them, in the city she had lived in for 2 years without anyone knowing who she was, the first light of dawn was beginning to break. The FBI field office in Columbus was a low concrete building that looked like every other government building Claire had ever been in. They entered through a loading bay, past 2 checkpoints, into a hallway that smelled like floor wax and burnt coffee. Russo led them to a room on the 2nd floor with a one-way mirror looking into an interrogation room. Senator Graham Tolliver was already inside. He was exactly what Claire had expected. Late 60s, silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of face that looked good on campaign posters and bad under cross-examination. He sat at the table with his hands folded in front of him, flanked by 2 lawyers in identical gray suits, and he looked, for all the world, like a man who had nothing to hide. Lassiter was standing in front of the mirror with her arms crossed. "He's been talking for about 10 minutes, she said without turning around. "Mostly the same speech. He's outraged. He's appalled. He's demanding a full investigation into whoever leaked classified information about Nightingale. He wants heads to roll." "Does he know we have Voss?" "Not yet." "When's he going to find out?" "Right about now." Lassiter pulled out her phone and sent a text. 10 seconds later, the door to the interrogation room opened, and a man Claire didn't recognize walked in and handed one of Tolliver's lawyers a single sheet of paper. The lawyer read it. His face went white. He leaned over and whispered something to Tolliver. Tolliver's expression didn't change, but his hands did. They unclenched, slowly, and came to rest flat on the table, fingers spread, the way a man's hands move when he's just been told something he wasn't ready to hear. "He knows," Sawyer said quietly. The lawyer stood up. "My client would like to request a recess." The FBI agent in the room shook his head. "Your client walked in here asking to make a statement. He can make it now or he can leave. But if he leaves, the cameras outside are going to want to know why." Tolliver put a hand on his lawyer's arm, said something Claire couldn't hear. The lawyer sat back down. "Senator," the agent said, "do you want to tell me why Deputy Director Voss was arrested 2 hours ago and immediately started naming you as the primary architect of a conspiracy to falsify casualty reports and obstruct a federal investigation?" Tolliver smiled. It was a politician's smile, warm and empty. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "He has recordings, Senator, emails, financial transfers. He's been collecting evidence for 3 years. Then I'm sure when you review that evidence, you'll find it's fabricated. Emil Voss is a desperate man facing serious charges. He'll say anything to save himself. Will he say you ordered the leak of operational coordinates that resulted in the deaths of 5 service members? He can say whatever he wants. It won't make it true. Lassiter turned away from the mirror, looked at Claire. You ready? She said. For what? To make him stop smiling. Claire nodded. Lassiter opened the door to the interrogation room and walked in. Claire followed. Tolliver looked up, saw Lassiter, didn't react. Then he saw Claire, and every muscle in his face went tight. Senator Tolliver, Lassiter said pleasantly, I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Claire Whitaker. I believe you declared her killed in action about 3 years ago. Tolliver stared. For a long, beautiful moment, he couldn't speak. He just sat there, hands flat on the table, mouth half open, looking at a ghost. That's impossible, he said finally. And yet, Claire said, here I am. Tolliver's lawyer started to say something. Tolliver cut him off with a gesture. You're supposed to be dead. I was. You made sure of that. Signed the paperwork yourself, didn't you? Or did you have Voss do it? I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, you do. You sold my team. You sent us into that valley knowing exactly what was waiting. You let 5 people die so you could prove a point to a committee, and then you buried the evidence and moved on. But you missed one. You missed me. And now I'm here, and Voss is talking, and your entire career is about to end in a courtroom. Tolliver leaned back in his chair. The smile came back, but it was thinner now, harder. You can't prove any of that. I don't have to. Voss already did. Voss is a liar. Maybe, but he's a liar with recordings and emails and a paper trail that leads straight back to you. So you can sit here and deny it all you want, but in about 6 hours, every news outlet in the country is going to be running the story, and by tomorrow morning, you're going to be the most hated man in America. Tolliver's jaw tightened. You think you've won? I know I have. He stood up. His lawyer stood with him. This interview is over, he said. Sit down, Senator, the FBI agent said. I'm invoking my right to sit down. Tolliver sat. The agent leaned forward. Senator, you walked in here voluntarily. You said you wanted to make a statement, so make it. On the record, right now. Or I'm going to assume everything Lieutenant Whitaker just said is true, and I'm going to start writing an arrest warrant. Tolliver looked at his lawyers. They both shook their heads. He looked at Claire. You have no idea what you've done, he said quietly. Yeah, I do. I stopped you. You stopped nothing. You think I'm the only one? You think this ends with me? There are a dozen people just like me in a dozen different offices, and they're all going to wake up tomorrow and realize that if you can come back from the dead, so can their mistakes. You've opened a door, Lieutenant, and you have no idea what's going to walk through it. Claire leaned down, hands on the table, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. Good, she said. Let them come. Because I've got 3 years of being dead to make up for, and I'm just getting started. She straightened, turned, walked out of the room. Behind her, she heard Tolliver start to speak, start to shout something, but Lassiter's voice cut him off, calm and cold and final. The door closed. In the observation room, Sawyer was waiting. How do you feel? He asked. Claire thought about it. Tired, she said. Yeah, me too. They stood there for a moment, watching through the glass as Tolliver sat with his head in his hands and his lawyers whispered frantically into their phones. It's not over, Claire said. I know. He's right. There are more of them. I know that too. But we got him. Yeah, we did. She looked at Sawyer. He looked back. And for the first time in 3 years, she let herself smile. It wasn't a big smile. It wasn't a perfect smile. But it was real. And in the corner of the room, on a monitor nobody had noticed yet, a news alert was already crawling across the bottom of the screen. Breaking. Senator Tolliver detained for questioning in military death cover-up. Sole survivor of Nightingale incident comes forward after 3 years. The story was out. And somewhere in Virginia, in a cemetery on a hill, the sunrise was just beginning to touch a headstone that would need very soon to be quietly removed. The news broke at 6 in the morning, and by 7 the entire country was watching. Claire saw it happen in real time from a conference room in the Columbus field office. standing with a cup of terrible coffee in one hand and Sawyer's jacket draped over her shoulders, because someone had finally noticed she was still wearing rain-soaked scrubs. The television on the wall cycled through every major network, and they were all saying the same thing in slightly different words. Senator Graham Tolliver, chair of the Armed Services Committee, was being investigated for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and the wrongful deaths of 5 military personnel. A sole survivor had come forward. Classified documents had been unsealed. The Pentagon was in chaos. The White House had no comment. Claire watched a reporter standing outside the Capitol say her name 3 times in 30 seconds, and it felt like hearing a language she used to speak but had forgotten. "You okay?" Sawyer asked. "Ask me tomorrow." "Fair." Lassiter walked in with her phone pressed to her ear and her face set in the expression of a woman who had been awake for 26 hours and was running on spite and black coffee. "Yes, Senator, I understand. No, Senator, I will not be making any public statements until the Inspector General completes the review because, Senator, unlike some people, I actually follow protocol." She hung up, looked at Claire. "That was the 3rd call this hour. Everyone wants a piece of this. DOD wants a briefing. The White House wants assurances. Half the Senate wants to know if their names are on Voss's flash drive, and the other half is pretending they never met Tolliver. Are their names on it? Some of them. Not as many as they're worried about, but enough." Lassiter set her phone down. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Claire looked at the television. A photograph of her in uniform had appeared on the screen, the one from her commissioning, young and serious and staring straight ahead like she'd been told the camera could see through lies. "I don't know what I am," she said quietly. Lassiter nodded. "That's a better answer." "What happens now?" "Now? Now you go home. You sleep. You let the lawyers and the investigators do their jobs. And in about 2 weeks, you sit in front of a congressional committee and you tell them everything. And then? And then you get to decide what the rest of your life looks like. You've earned that." Claire turned away from the television, looked at the general. "What about Voss? He's cooperating, full immunity in exchange for testimony. He'll spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, but he won't spend it in a cell." "And Tolliver?" "Tolliver's done. Even if the charges don't stick, and they will, his career is over. The Senate Ethics Committee is already drafting a censure resolution. He'll be out by the end of the month." Claire nodded slowly. It should have felt like winning. It didn't feel like anything yet. "There's one more thing," Lassiter said. She pulled a folder from under her arm and set it on the table. "This came through about an hour ago. It's from the Army." Claire opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, official letterhead, a lot of words that blurred together until she got to the one that mattered. Honorable discharge. "They're releasing me? They're giving you a choice. You can come back. Full reinstatement, back pay, the works. Or you can walk away, honorably, with your record intact and your benefits restored. Either way, you're not dead anymore. Officially." Claire read the letter twice. The second time didn't make it any clearer. "What would you do?" she asked. Lassiter considered it. 3 years ago, I'd have told you to come back. The Army needs people like you. But 3 years ago, I didn't know what it costs to be people like you. So now, I'd tell you to think about what you want, not what anyone else needs. You've given enough." Claire set the letter down. "Can I have some time?" "Take all the time you need. The paperwork's not going anywhere." Lassiter's phone rang again. She glanced at it, sighed, and walked out into the hallway. Sawyer stayed. "You going back?" he asked. "I don't know." "You miss it?" She thought about the ridge, thought about the weight of Marston on her back, the sound of the helicopter she couldn't reach, the long walk through a country that wanted her dead. Thought about the 3 years after, the quiet shifts at St. Aurelia, the way no one had looked at her twice because she'd made sure there was nothing to see. "I miss the people," she said. "I don't miss the rest." Sawyer nodded. "Yeah, me too." They stood there for a while, not saying anything, just 2 soldiers in a conference room watching the world rearrange itself on a television screen. A knock at the door. Agent Russo stuck her head in. "Lieutenant, there's someone here to see you." "Who?" "She says she's your aunt." Claire's heart stopped. "She's here? Now?" "Downstairs. We tried to tell her this was a secure facility, but she said she'd driven 4 hours and she wasn't leaving until she saw you. And honestly, ma'am, I think she scared the front desk. Claire looked at Sawyer. He was smiling. Go, he said. I'll handle things here. She went. The lobby of the FBI field office was not designed for comfort. It was all hard chairs and linoleum and a receptionist behind bulletproof glass who looked like she'd been awake since the Carter administration. Sitting in one of those hard chairs, purse in her lap, was a woman in her early 70s with gray hair pulled back in a bun and the kind of face that had weathered 60 years of Arizona sun and come out tougher for it. Aunt Dee. She stood up when Claire walked in. Didn't say anything, just stood there, looking at her niece like she was checking to make sure all the pieces were still attached. Hi, Claire said. Dee crossed the room in 4 strides and hit her. Not hard, just a sharp smack on the shoulder, the way you hit someone when words aren't big enough. You let me bury you, Dee said, voice shaking. You let me stand in a cemetery and cry over a box that didn't have you in it. I know. You let me spend 3 years thinking you were dead. I know. And now you show up on the news like it's nothing, like you've just been on vacation, like I didn't... Her voice broke. Claire stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her, and Dee held on like she was afraid if she let go, Claire would disappear again. I'm sorry, Claire said quietly. I'm so sorry. You better be. They stood there for a long time. The receptionist pretended very hard not to be watching. Somewhere in the building, a printer jammed. Outside, the morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the last of the rain. When Dee finally let go, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. Why didn't you tell me? Because if I did, you'd have been in danger, and I couldn't let that happen. So you let me think you were dead instead. Yeah, Dee shook her head. You're an idiot. I know. But you're my idiot. She cupped Claire's face in both hands, the way she used to when Claire was 12 and skinned her knee falling off a bike. You're okay? They didn't hurt you? I'm okay. You sure? I'm sure. Dee nodded. Then she pulled a Tupperware container out of her purse and shoved it into Claire's hands. Pot roast, she said. I made it this morning. You're too skinny. Claire looked down at the container, then back up at her aunt, and for the first time in 3 years she laughed. It came out broken and strange, but it was real. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. Just eat it and call me every day. I don't care if you're busy. I don't care if you're saving the world. You call me. I will. Promise. I promise. Dee squeezed her hands once more, then turned and walked toward the door. She stopped halfway. Claire? Yeah? That general, the one who ate pot roast with me. She said you were a hero. She said you saved a lot of people. Claire didn't know what to say to that. I just did my job. No, Dee said quietly. You did more than that, and I'm proud of you. Your mother would be too. Then she was gone, out the door and into the parking lot, leaving Claire standing in the lobby with a Tupperware container and a feeling in her chest that was too big to name. Sawyer appeared at her elbow. She seems nice? She is. She hit you. I deserved it. Yeah, you did. They walked back upstairs. The news was still playing. Tolliver's face was on every screen now, frozen in a photograph from a committee hearing, looking smug and untouchable. The chyron underneath read, Senator Tolliver resigns amid corruption scandal. He's out, Sawyer said. Already? Lassiter just got word. He announced it about 10 minutes ago, says he's stepping down to spend more time with his family, which is politician for, I'm about to be indicted and I want to look graceful. Claire sat down. The weight of the last 48 hours was starting to settle in, heavy and strange. Is it really over? She asked. The big part is, the rest is just paperwork. And trials. And trials. She looked at him. What about you? What are you going to do? Sawyer shrugged. Same thing I've been doing, keeping people alive, yelling at lieutenants who do stupid things. The usual. You ever think about getting out? Every day? But then I remember I'm too old to do anything else, and the Army's the only place that'll put up with me. You're not that old? I'm old enough. He sat down next to her. Claire, listen. I know the last few days have been hell. I know you're tired, but I need you to hear something. What? You did the right thing. Coming back, telling the truth. All of it. It would have been easier to stay gone. Nobody would have blamed you, but you came back anyway, and you faced it. And because of that, a lot of people who were doing bad things are going to answer for it. That matters. You matter. She looked down at her hands. I don't feel like I matter. I feel like I just broke everything open and walked away. You didn't walk away. You're sitting right here. You know what I mean? Yeah, I do. And I'm telling you it's okay to feel that way. You spent 3 years being invisible. You're allowed to be uncomfortable now that people can see you again. She didn't answer. Sawyer stood up. Come on, let's get you out of here. They left the building through a side exit, avoiding the cameras that had started to gather at the front. A car was waiting, unmarked, military plates. The driver didn't ask questions. They drove through Columbus in silence, past the morning traffic, past the coffee shops filling up with people who had no idea that the woman in the back seat had just burned down a senator's career. The car stopped in front of St. Aurelia Medical Center. Claire looked up at the building. 6 stories. Brick and glass. The place she'd worked for 2 years without anyone knowing she wasn't supposed to exist. You sure about this? Sawyer asked. No, but I need to see it. You want me to come with you? No, I need to do this alone. He nodded. I'll be here when you're done. She got out of the car. The lobby looked exactly the same. Same receptionist, same plastic plants, same smell of antiseptic and cafeteria food. She walked past the front desk without stopping, took the service elevator to the 4th floor, and stepped out into the cardiology wing. It was mid-morning. The shift had just changed. Nurses moved in and out of rooms with charts and medication trays, voices low, efficient. None of them looked at her. None of them recognized her. She was just another person in street clothes, another visitor, another nobody. She walked to the break room. Maribel was there, pouring coffee from the pot that was always half burned. She looked up when Claire walked in, and her face went through about 6 emotions in 2 seconds before settling on something between joy and fury. You, Maribel said. Me. You're on the news. I know. They're saying you stopped a terrorist attack. I helped. They're saying you were in the army. I was. Maribel set the coffee pot down very carefully. You worked here for 2 years. 2 years. And you never said a word. I couldn't. Couldn't or wouldn't. Both. Maribel looked at her for a long moment. Then she crossed the room and pulled Claire into a hug that smelled like cigarettes and lavender hand lotion. You scared me, girl, she said quietly. I thought something happened to you. I thought maybe you got hurt or you ran or I don't know. I just knew you were gone and nobody would tell me why. I'm sorry. You should be. Maribel pulled back, hands on Claire's shoulders. But you're okay now. Getting there. Good, because we're short-staffed, and if you're not coming back, I need to know so I can yell at HR. Claire almost smiled. I don't think I'm coming back. Didn't think so. You got bigger things now. Saw you on TV with all those generals. You looked good. Tired, but good. Thanks. Maribel poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Claire. So what now? You going back to the army? I don't know yet. Well, when you figure it out, you let me know. And you come back and visit, you hear? Don't be a stranger. I won't. They stood there drinking bad coffee in a break room that had been Claire's refuge for 2 years, and it felt like saying goodbye to a version of herself she wasn't sure she'd ever see again. When the coffee was gone, Claire set the cup down and walked out. Sawyer was waiting in the lobby, exactly where she'd left him. You good? He asked. Yeah, I'm good. They drove back to the field office. Lassiter was waiting with a tablet and a schedule that had Claire's next 2 weeks mapped out in 30-minute blocks. Congressional testimony is set for the 18th, the general said. You'll have counsel present, and we'll prep you for the likely questions. After that, there's a Pentagon debrief, a DoD review, and about 6 different agencies who want to talk to you about operational security. It's going to be a circus. I can handle a circus. I know you can. That's not what I'm worried about. What are you worried about? Lassiter set the tablet down. I'm worried that when this is over, you're going to disappear again. Not because you have to, because you think you should. Claire didn't answer right away. I'm not going to disappear. You sure? Yeah. Good. Because the Army's going to need people like you when the dust settles. Not just operators, teachers. The kind of people who can take what they learned in the worst places and make sure the next generation doesn't have to learn it the hard way. You offering me a job, General? I'm offering you a purpose. There's a difference. Claire thought about it. Thought about Marston's son. Thought about the specialist with the sunburn who hadn't laughed when his buddies mocked her. Thought about all the young soldiers who were going to walk into rooms they weren't ready for, with leaders who might or might not have their backs. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. 2 weeks later, Claire sat in a hearing room in the Capitol and told her story to a panel of senators who took notes and asked questions and tried very hard to look like they'd never met Graham Tolliver. The testimony took 4 hours. By the time she was finished, 3 more resignations had been announced, and the Armed Services Committee had been dissolved pending a full investigation. Tolliver himself was indicted 6 days later on 14 counts ranging from conspiracy to treason. The trial was set for the following spring. Claire would be the star witness. She moved out of the safe house and into a small apartment in Arlington. Aunt Dee visited twice. Sawyer stopped by once a week with takeout and mission reports he claimed he needed a second opinion on, but really just wanted an excuse to check in. Lassiter called on a Tuesday. I've got an offer for you, the general said. I'm listening. Instructor position, Fort Benning. You'd be teaching advanced field medicine to ranger candidates. It's not glamorous, it's not exciting, but it's important, and you'd be good at it. Claire looked out the window of her apartment at the city she'd spent 3 years avoiding and 3 weeks learning to live in again. When do I start? Whenever you're ready. I'm ready now. 3 months later, Claire Whitaker stood in front of a classroom of 22 ranger candidates and told them the same thing her first instructor had told her a decade earlier. Most of you are here because you think you're tough. Some of you are here because you want to prove something. A few of you are here because you don't know what else to do. None of that matters. What matters is that when someone next to you is bleeding out and the helicopter's 10 minutes away, you don't freeze. You don't panic. You don't wait for someone else to fix it. You fix it. And if you can't fix it, you stay with them until the end. That's the job. That's all of it. One of the candidates raised a hand. Ma'am, is it true you carried a guy 12 miles with a bullet in your leg? It was 6 miles, and it wasn't a bullet. It was shrapnel, and I didn't have a choice. Did he make it? She paused. No. The room went quiet, but I stayed with him, and when I finally put him down, I made sure he wasn't alone. That's what you do. That's what we all do. We show up, we do the work, and when it's not enough, we carry it anyway. The class ended. The candidates filed out. One of them, a kid who couldn't have been more than 20, with a fresh scar over his left eye, stopped at the door. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Go ahead. How do you do it? How do you keep going when you know it's not always going to be enough? Claire looked at him. She thought about Marston. She thought about the ridge. She thought about the 3 years she'd spent being dead and the 3 months she'd spent learning how to be alive again. You find something worth carrying, she said, and you don't let go. The kid nodded. Yes, ma'am. He left. Claire packed up her notes, turned off the lights, and walked out into the Georgia sun. Somewhere in Washington, a trial was being scheduled. Somewhere in Ohio, Maribel was pouring coffee for someone new. Somewhere in a cemetery in Virginia, a headstone had been quietly removed and replaced with a bench that bore no name, just a line from a poem about soldiers who came home. And here, on this base, in this classroom, Claire Whitaker was teaching the next generation how to save lives in places where saving lives was the hardest thing anyone would ever do. She wasn't the nurse at the Blue Kettle anymore. She wasn't the ghost in the personnel file. She wasn't Lieutenant Whitaker, killed in action, buried with honors. She was just Claire, scarred, tired, alive. And every morning she woke up and chose to keep going. Not because it was easy, not because it was fair, not because anyone was watching or keeping score, but because she had been underestimated her entire life by commanders who thought medics were support staff, by soldiers who thought quiet meant weak, by men in suits who thought she could be erased with a signature. And every single one of them had learned the same lesson. The people you underestimate are the ones who survive, the ones who disappear when you're not looking, the ones who come back when you least expect it, the ones who remember everything you forgot, and the ones who make sure that the next time someone tries to bury the truth, it comes back with a name, a voice, and a reckoning you didn't see coming. 3 years ago, Claire Whitaker died on a ridge in a country the United States was never in. 6 months ago, she came back. And she wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot.